Thaddeus Crowell didn't wait for his cousin's grandfather to finish dying before he started rewriting the numbers. 3 days before old Gerald Marlowe drew his last breath, Thaddeus had already met privately with 2 territorial judges, commissioned a legal review of the family trust, and sent calling cards to 4 wealthy ranchers whose sons were, conveniently, unmarried. He sat in Gerald's own study using Gerald's own pen and scratched out a timeline. 30 days. That was all Evelyn had. 30 days to find a husband, or everything Gerald had spent 40 years building would fall into Thaddeus's hands by default. He folded the paper, slipped it into his coat pocket, and walked back into the hallway, just as the doctor emerged from the bedroom, with his hat pressed to his chest. Thaddeus arranged his face into grief. He was very good at that. This kind of story moves you the kind where ordinary people are backed into impossible corners and still find a way to stand. Then subscribe to this channel and hit that like button before we go any further. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And stay with us until the very end, because what happens between a desperate heiress and a penniless cowboy in the Montana winter of 1889 is something you will not see coming. The morning after Gerald Marlowe's funeral, Evelyn sat in the estate attorney's office and listened to a man named Horace Finch read the terms of the family trust in a flat, apologetic voice, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis he hadn't caused but still felt responsible for. She already knew most of it. Her grandfather had warned her, years ago, in that roundabout way older men warned women about things they assumed women couldn't handle directly. He'd said something about the trust being structured for the era, which Evelyn had understood to mean structured by men who believed a woman alone couldn't be trusted with 40,000 acres and a cattle operation worth more than most small towns. What she hadn't known was the deadline. 30 days. Horace said, setting the document on his desk with both hands, as if the weight of it required care. From the date of Mr. Marlowe's passing, should you remain unmarried at the time of your 30th birthday, which falls within that window, controlling interest transfers to Thaddeus, Evelyn said. To your cousin, Thaddeus Crowell, yes. Evelyn looked at the window. Outside, 2 ranch hands were crossing the yard. One of them was laughing at something the other had said. She watched them and thought about how simple it looked from here. Just 2 men walking. No legal documents, no clocks running down. And if I marry, she said, then the estate remains fully in your name. Your husband holds no automatic claim unless you choose to grant one. The trust is specific on that point, actually somewhat unusual for its time. Your grandfather seems to have anticipated. He anticipated everything, Evelyn said, except dying before he could fix it. Horace folded his hands on the desk. He was the kind of man who dealt in facts and found feelings inconvenient. But he had known Evelyn since she was 7 years old, and he let himself say what he was actually thinking. Your cousin has already contacted me, he said. He's compiled a list of eligible men. Wealthy men. Men who would sign whatever you asked and still find a way to take the ranch from you inside of a year. I've seen the type before, Miss Marlowe. He paused. I've written their contracts. I know what Thaddeus is doing, Evelyn said. He's offering me a choice between 2 versions of losing. Then what will you do? She stood up and pulled on her gloves. Her hands were steadier than she felt. I'll figure something else out, she said. She didn't have anything else figured out. Not yet. Thaddeus came to the Marlowe house 3 days later, which Evelyn had expected, wearing a suit that cost more than most Montana families earned in a season, which she had also expected, and bringing with him a man named Sutton Baird, which she had not. Sutton Baird was 45, 3 times married, and currently between wives in the way a man is between wives when the previous ones have learned something about him and made arrangements. He had a cattle operation in Wyoming, or claimed to, and he smiled at Evelyn with the specific kind of warmth that men with poor intentions deploy when they want something. They sat in the front parlor. Thaddeus did the talking, which was its own kind of performance. Sutton is genuinely interested, Evelyn. He has no designs on the estate management. He simply finds you well. He said as much to me privately. I think if you gave him a real conversation, how much are you paying him? Evelyn asked. Parlor went quiet. Sutton Baird adjusted his collar. Thaddeus smiled the way men smile when they are recalibrating. I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, you are, Evelyn said. What's the arrangement? He marries me, steps aside from management, and you give him what? Access to the river crossing? Timber rights on the northern parcel? A percentage of the cattle sales? She looked at Sutton Baird directly. Simpler than that. A flat payment? Sutton Baird stood up. He had enough dignity left to be embarrassed, even if he didn't have enough to have refused the meeting. I don't have to sit here and be spoken to like this. No, Evelyn agreed. You don't. The door is behind you. He left. Thaddeus stayed, and for the first time his performance slipped. Something colder moved behind his eyes, something he usually kept further back than this. You have 27 days, he said quietly. I am trying to give you options, Evelyn. I am trying to protect you from what, she said. From being a woman who owns her own land? From making my own decisions about who I marry and when and why. She stood up, which she'd not done until now, which made Thaddeus have to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. It was a small thing, but she was aware of it. Get out of my house, Thaddeus. And the next man you send to my parlor, you'd better make sure he's willing to be thrown out, because that's exactly what will happen. After he left, she stood at the window and watched his carriage roll down the drive, and her hand shook not from fear, though there was fear underneath, mostly from the pure effort of having held herself steady for that long. She had 27 days, and she had absolutely no idea what she was going to do. The storm came in 4 days later, the kind that northern Montana produces in early October, like a reminder of what the land actually is beneath the grass and cattle and the illusion of civilization. Evelyn had been riding out to check the eastern fence line because 2 of the ranch hands had reported a section that looked compromised. And because, sitting inside the Marlowe house, waiting for her life to be resolved by a calendar was not something her nature permitted. She'd grown up in this territory. She knew how to read weather. She had misjudged this one, or rather she'd correctly read it and incorrectly estimated how fast it would move, which was a different kind of mistake. The rear axle of her carriage cracked on a rutted creek crossing 3 miles from the main road. The horses spooked at a thunderclap. By the time Evelyn had them calmed and standing, the rain had turned to something between rain and ice, horizontal and mean, and the light was going. She stood in it for a minute, holding both horses by their bridles, water running off the brim of her hat in a steady stream, and catalogued her options. They were not good options. She heard hoofbeats before she saw the rider, and her first instinct was to step to the side of the road, which said something about the state of her thinking after Thaddeus's visit. The horse that came around the bend was a big dark bay, and the man on it pulled up short when his light caught the broken carriage. He didn't say anything immediately. He dismounted, gave the carriage a quick look, then looked at Evelyn. Water was running off him too, but he seemed barely to notice it. You hurt? He said. No. Axle? Yes. He crouched down beside the wheel without being invited. Evelyn watched him run his hand along the brake, and there was something methodical about the way he moved. Not performative, just a man assessing a problem the same way he'd assess any other problem. Rear axle's cracked through, he said. Can't fix it here. Not in this. He stood up and looked at the sky, which was the particular dark that means the weather has more plans. You're about 2 miles from my place. You can shelter there until it passes. I can come back for the carriage tomorrow, your place, Evelyn said. Small homestead. Nothing fancy. He said it without any defensiveness, just information. She looked at the sky herself. She looked at her 2 horses, both of which were now pressing their heads low against the rain. She looked at the road, which was becoming a creek in real time. All right, she said. He helped her unhitch one of the horses without making a production of it, tied the other to a fence post, with a practiced knot that she noticed. And they rode together through the dark and the rain toward a light she couldn't see yet, but he clearly knew was there. His name was Wade Callahan. She learned that much during the ride, which was not long in distance but long enough in weather for conversation to feel natural rather than forced. He asked if she lived nearby. She said she was out from the Marlowe estate. He nodded without the flinch that name usually produced in people, which meant either he didn't know who the Marlowes were unlikely in this county or he simply didn't care, which she found unexpectedly interesting. She did not say she was Evelyn Marlowe. She wasn't sure afterward why not. Partly instinct. Partly because for the last 3 weeks, every conversation had started with that name and ended with someone wanting something from her because of it, and it was possible she was simply tired. The homestead was small as advertised. A cabin, a barn, a fence that needed work. Light came from 2 windows. Before they reached the porch, the door opened, and a boy of about 14 stood in the frame, already holding a lantern. "You're late," the boy said, and then saw Evelyn and adjusted rapidly. "I mean, is everything all right?" "Carriage broke down on the creek crossing," Wade said. She needed shelter. Get Maisie to put more water on. The boy Nolan, she would learn, stepped back and let them in, and held the lantern without being asked, because he'd already understood that she couldn't see well in the dark. She registered that without commenting on it. Inside the cabin it was warm and smelled like wood smoke and the specific smell of a house where children live, which is different from other houses in ways that are hard to name but easy to recognize. A girl of about 9 was sitting at the table with a slate and a piece of chalk, and she looked up at Evelyn with the frank, unself-conscious appraisal that children deploy before they've learned that staring is rude. Under the table, partly hidden behind the girl's legs, was the smallest boy. He had his chin on the girl's knee, and he was looking at Evelyn too, but from a lower angle, which gave him an expression of examining something that had dropped from the sky. "That's Maisie," Wade said. "That's Toby. Kids, she needs dry clothes and something hot." "Can you manage that?" "Yes, Papa," Maisie said, already standing. She said it the way a child says yes, when yes is simply the answer to everything, automatic and unquestioning, and Evelyn thought, this girl has been managing things for a long time. They gave her one of Wade's work shirts and a pair of trousers that had belonged to someone, a wife. Evelyn guessed, and she changed in the back room, while the sounds of the household rearranged themselves around her arrival. The way a household does when it is used to making room for what needs to be managed. When she came back out, there was soup on the table, and the children were arranged around it in the particular way of a family that has a shape to its evenings. Toby had come out from behind his sister and was sitting beside the empty chair, watching it, as if he'd been assigned the task of guarding her place. She sat down. He looked up at her with the specific attention of a 6-year-old who has decided to take inventory. "Are you lost?" he asked. "My carriage broke," Evelyn said. "Mama's carriage broke once," Toby said, "but she didn't come home." The table went quiet. Nolan looked at his soup. Maisie put her hand briefly on Toby's arm, the same gesture an adult would make, patient and firm. "That's enough, Toby," Wade said, without harshness. "I'm just saying she might want to know it happened before. She doesn't need to know that tonight." Evelyn looked at Wade. He was looking at his son with an expression that had grief in it, old grief, the kind that's been lived with long enough to become just a feature of the face. He caught her looking and glanced away. "How far are you from home?" he asked. 5 miles, roughly. Storm should pass by morning. "I'll ride with you." "You don't have to do that. The road's got 2 creek crossings," he said. "After this rain, you'll want someone who knows the high points." She thought about arguing. She didn't. The storm lasted through the night. Evelyn slept on a narrow cot in the back room, under a quilt that was faded but clean, and she listened to the rain on the roof and the sounds of the cabin settling, and somewhere in the house, the small boy talking in his sleep, which was not words exactly, but something that had the rhythm of conversation with a person who wasn't there. In the morning, the light came in gray and cold, and the mud was an inch deep in the yard, and she helped Maisie feed the horses, before Wade came out because she had woken early and needed something to do with her hands. Maisie handed her a bucket without ceremony and watched her carry it without comment until they were inside the barn together, where the light was dim and the warm smell of horses was like something from before complicated things. "You know horses," Maisie said. It was not a compliment or a question. Just an observation. "My grandfather kept a large stable," Evelyn said. "Papa says most rich people don't actually know how to take care of things," Maisie said. "They just own them." Evelyn looked at her. "Is that what I look like? A rich person?" Maisie considered this with more seriousness than most adults bring to a question. "You look like somebody who's used to making decisions," she said finally. "Whether that means rich or not, I can't tell yet." Evelyn almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. Wade rode with her to the main road and then to these estate gates, and when they got there, he pulled up and looked at the house at the end of the drive, which was, objectively, very large, with the gray October light on it and the smoke from 3 chimneys and the stables visible behind. She saw him put the picture together, not with surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he'd suspected. Marlowe estate, he said. Yes. He nodded, then he said, You're Axel. I'll go back for the carriage today. Send word when you want it returned. Thank you, Evelyn said. For last night, anybody would have stopped, he said. She didn't argue, but she thought, no, not anybody. Not in that rain, not with 3 children waiting for them at home. She watched him ride back the way they'd come, not looking back, just a man on a horse in a muddy October morning. And she thought about his son saying Maffa's carrot broke once, and she didn't come home. And she thought about the girl who handed a bucket to a stranger without needing to make anything of it. And she thought about the quiet in the cabin at night, the shape of a family around a wound that hadn't closed. Then she rode up to her house, which was very large and full of things that belonged to her, and sat at her grandfather's desk for a long time without doing anything. The deadline was 23 days away. The idea arrived the way ideas arrive when the mind is cornered sideways, implausible, and already half-formed before she could examine it for flaws. Pushed it away. She spent 2 more days receiving Thaddeus's next candidates, a banker from Helena and a rancher's son from Billings, who had the specific combination of good manners and no substance that a certain kind of upbringing produces. She rejected both within the first 15 minutes of conversation, politely, firmly, in the way she had learned to reject things without giving anyone a door to push through. She spent another day reviewing the trust language with Horace Finch, looking for angles. There weren't any. On the 4th day after the storm, she rode alone to the Callahan homestead. Wade was in the yard-splitting wood when she came through the gate, and he straightened and set the axe desk down and watched her ride up with the expression of a man trying to figure out what category this falls into. Miss Marlowe, he said. You knew, she said. Figured it out on the road, he said. Didn't seem like my business. She dismounted without waiting for help, tied her horse to the fence, and took a breath that she hoped wasn't visible. Then she walked to his kitchen table, because he'd held the door open without being asked, and she set an envelope down on the wood. I need you to read this, she said. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at her. What is it? It's a legal document, she said. A marriage contract. 1 year, no claim on the estate. No obligations beyond appearing publicly as husband and wife. She kept her voice level. My grandfather's trust requires me to be married before my 30th birthday. That is 20 days from now. If I'm not, a man named Thaddeus Crowell inherits control of everything. He will liquidate the operation within 6 months and sell the land in parcels, which will destroy the grazing access that every small ranching family in this valley depends on. Wade looked at the envelope. And if you marry, he said, then I keep the estate. I run it the way my grandfather built it. And she opened the envelope herself, because he hadn't moved toward it. Your debts, which I looked up, are substantial. 3 years of back rent on this homestead. An outstanding loan against last year's cattle loss. Equipment debt from the spring. She set the document on the table with the numbers visible. All of it cleared. Additionally, legal title to this land transferred to you permanently. Your children will never face eviction. Education funds set aside for all 3, guaranteed regardless of what happens between us. She looked up. At the end of 1 year, the arrangement concludes. You walk away with your land, your debts gone, and your children's futures secured. Silence. Outside, somewhere behind the barn, Toby was talking to himself about something that required a lot of sound effects. Wade pulled out a chair and sat down, slowly, like a man who needs a moment to make sure the floor is still where he left it. He looked at the document. He didn't pick it up. Why me? He said. 'Cause you stopped in a storm, Evelyn said. 'Cause you didn't ask who I was before you helped me. Because your son said something to me at dinner that kept me awake all night, and I couldn't stop thinking about this family. She stopped. That was more than she'd meant to say. She leveled herself. And because I've had 3 weeks of men sitting in my parlor looking at me the way men look at land they want to buy. You looked at me like a person. I need someone who can keep doing that. Wade was quiet for a long time. Maisie appeared in the doorway from the back room, took one look at the two of them at the table with a document between them, and withdrew without a word. Evelyn was aware of the silence from the doorway. That meant the girl was still there, listening. The children aren't part of any bargain, Wade said finally. I know that. I mean it. Whatever this arrangement is, they don't get told it's one thing when it's another. They don't get used as... He stopped. He was looking at the table, not at her. They've had enough things change on them that turned out different from what they were told. Then neither are they, Evelyn said. Whatever happens between us, whatever it is or isn't, they will always come first. That's not part of the contract. That's something I'm telling you directly. Wade looked up. She met his eyes and held them and didn't look away, because she meant it, and she needed him to understand that she meant it, and the only way to communicate that was to not move. He looked back at the document. Then he looked toward the back room, where Maisie had been standing, and where Toby had now appeared next to his sister, and where Nolan had come in from outside through the back door, and was standing in the hallway with mud on his boots. All three of them watching their father at the table, with papers and a woman they'd sheltered from a storm 4 days ago. Give me until tomorrow, Wade said. All right, Evelyn said. She left the document on the table. He came to the estate the next morning, alone, before 7 o'clock, while the frost was still on the grass. She was already up. She suspected he knew she would be. He stood at the kitchen entrance rather than the front door, which she thought was deliberate, and she brought him in and poured coffee without ceremony, and they sat at the kitchen table the way she'd seen him sit at his own. I talked to the children, he said. All right, Nolan's against it. He thinks Wade stopped. He thinks wealthy people collect things and then stop caring about them. He's not entirely wrong based on what he's seen. He held the cup in both hands. Maisie didn't say much. She asked if it was something I wanted to do or something I had to do. I told her it was something I was choosing. She said to make sure that was true before I said yes. He glanced up. She's 9. I know, Evelyn said. Toby asked if you'd still be around for breakfast. A very slight change in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close to one. He likes breakfast. Evelyn looked at the table. And you, she said. Wade set down the cup. I'll do it, he said. But I need you to understand something. I'll show up in public as your husband. I'll deal with whatever your cousin throws at you. I'll do my part. But I'm not going to stand next to you at social events and look like a man who married money. I won't do that to my kids. They need to see me as something besides a man who made a transaction. Then don't make it look like one, Evelyn said. He studied her. What does that mean? It means if you're going to be my husband on paper, you might as well actually work the ranch, she said. I've got foremen who've been overcharging me for 3 years, and a grazing rotation that's going to cost me 200 head by spring if nobody fixes it. I need someone who can look at a cattle operation and tell me what's actually wrong with it, not what sounds like what's wrong with it. She looked at him steadily. I watched you red that land in the dark during a rainstorm. It's not nothing. Something shifted in his face. Not softening exactly. More like a man recognizing a version of the conversation he hadn't expected to be in. You're offering me real work, he said. I'm offering you a reason to be here that doesn't require you to pretend, she said. Quiet for a moment. All right, he said. Then I've got some things to say about your eastern fence line before we go any further. She almost smiled. She was getting better at stopping herself. I'd expect nothing less, she said. They shook hands across the kitchen table. Neither of them had any idea what they were actually agreeing to. The courthouse wedding happened on a Thursday, which is not a day anyone plans a wedding for, which suited both of them. Horace Finch acted as witness with an expression of professional neutrality that did not quite conceal his relief. The justice of the peace read the words without embellishment, and Wade said what needed to be said in a level voice, and Evelyn said what needed to be said without looking away from the window where a horse was tied outside and a magpie was examining. The animal's saddle with the focused interest that magpies bring to everything. They rode back to the estate in separate horses. When they turned through the gate and the house came into view, Wade looked at it for a moment without speaking. It was not a small house. It had never been a small house. He looked at it with the particular expression of a man who is making a private calculation about what something is going to cost. Then he said, "My kids need 2 days to pack up the homestead. I'll come the day after. Take whatever time you need," Evelyn said. 3 days, he said, adjusting. 3 days, she said. He turned his horse and rode back toward his cabin, and Evelyn sat at the estate gate for a moment, looking at the house, and felt the strange, specific vertigo of a person who has just made a decision that cannot be unmade, and is not entirely sure it was the right one, and is also not entirely sure it was wrong. Then she rode in and told the housekeeper to prepare 3 additional rooms. 2 days later, the word had spread across the county in the way news spreads in places where news is the primary entertainment. By the morning after that, Thaddeus Crowell had already contacted 3 lawyers. And Wade Callahan was standing in the Marlowe kitchen at 6 in the morning with a 9-year-old girl at his elbow who was examining the housekeeper's arrangement of the pots with the intensity of a general assessing terrain, while a 6-year-old sat at the kitchen table and ate a biscuit and watched everyone with the patient satisfaction of a child who has achieved what he wanted. And a 14-year-old stood in the doorway and looked at everything in the house with an expression that said, "I know how this ends, and I'm not going to let it." Evelyn looked at all 3 of them. She thought, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." She went to the stove and poured coffee for Wade without asking if he wanted it, because he'd been awake since before dawn, and anyone could see that from 10 feet away. Took it without ceremony. "Your northern grazing rotation," he said. "I looked at your records last night. You've been running the same pastures 3 seasons in a row. You're going to lose that grass by February." "I know," Evelyn said. "Nobody would listen to me about it." Wade looked at her over the cup. "I'll listen," he said. Toby looked up from his biscuit and announced to nobody in particular, "I like it here." Nolan, from the doorway, said nothing, but he stopped looking like he was about to leave. The first week was an education in how differently 2 people could inhabit the same space. Evelyn was up at 5:30, which she had always been, moving through the house in the dark with a lamp and a cup of coffee and the specific quietness of a person accustomed to being the only one awake. Now, more often than not, when she came down the back stairs into the kitchen, Wade was already there, not making noise, not doing anything particularly purposeful, just sitting with his own coffee and looking at whatever papers he'd been reviewing the night before, supply ledgers, grazing records, the repair estimates from the north barn that 3 different contractors had given 3 wildly different numbers for. The first morning she came down and found him there, she stopped in the doorway. He looked up. "Early," she said. "Always am," he said. She poured her coffee and sat at the other end of the table, and they read their separate papers and didn't say much, and it was so ordinary that it was almost strange. The ordinariness of it, 2 people in a kitchen before the world started up. The problem was the rest of the house. The Marlowe estate ran on a household staff of 11, which Evelyn had always considered excessive and had never managed to reduce because her grandfather had hired most of them, and the economy of the thing was complicated. These 11 people had, within 48 hours of Wade and the children's arrival, formed opinions. Not expressed opinions, mostly, the kind that live in the way a person sets a table, or answers a question, or fails to answer one. Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper, had been with the Marlowes for 19 years. She was correct and efficient, and she had never, in those 19 years, been required to set out a child's breakfast things or explain to a 6-year-old that the room at the end of the hall was not a storage room but a sitting room and was not for rolling a wooden horse across the floor at 7 in the morning. Toby was deeply interested in that sitting room. Evelyn heard the conversation from the hallway, Mrs. Holt's careful, controlled voice explaining the room's function, and Toby's absolute sincerity when he said, "But it's not being used for sitting," which was accurate, as nobody had sat in that room in at least 2 years. She stood in the hall for a moment and then walked past without intervening, because she was genuinely uncertain whose side she was on. Later, she found Toby in the kitchen, helping one of the ranch hands name a bucket. Not the contents of the bucket itself. The ranch hand, a weathered man named Percy, who had worked the Marlowe operation for 12 years, and had never in those 12 years been required to name a bucket, was going along with it with more patience than Evelyn would have predicted. "That one's Gerald," Toby said, pointing. Why Gerald? Percy said. It's a strong name, Toby said. He looks like a Gerald. Percy looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the bucket. It does have a certain Gerald quality, she said, and kept walking. She heard Percy laugh behind her, which was a sound she was fairly sure she'd never heard from him before. Nolan was a different problem. He moved through the house like someone who had agreed to be present without agreeing to participate, which was a distinction Evelyn understood because she had employed it herself in various social situations. He was polite. He did what was asked of him. He helped with the horses without being told twice, and he was genuinely good at it in the way that comes from actual affinity rather than just practice. But every time she came near, something in him went quiet and watchful, the way an animal goes still when it can't yet determine whether a thing is a threat. She didn't push. She had been pushed at enough in her life to know what it produced. What she did on the fourth day was ask his opinion. She found him in the stable, working with a young mare that had been difficult to handle since she'd been brought in, a horse that two of the regular hands had given up on as too nervous to be worth the effort. Nolan wasn't doing anything dramatic. He was just standing near her, not reaching, not making a production of it, just occupying the same air until the animal got used to him being there. She was brought in with two other horses that were sold off the day she arrived, Evelyn said from outside the stall. Nobody thought that would matter. Nolan didn't look at her, but he wasn't pretending she wasn't there. It matters, he said. She was used to them. That's what I thought. The hands said she was poorly trained. She's not poorly trained, Nolan said, with a certainty that was not arrogance, just knowledge. She doesn't trust anyone here yet. There's a difference. Evelyn leaned on the stall gate. Can you work with her? Now he looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, if you wanted to spend time with her. Figure out what she needs. Whether she can be brought around. She kept her voice neutral. Not casual, because that would be obvious. Just straightforward. I'm asking your opinion, not assigning you a chore. He looked back at the mare. She had shifted slightly toward him while they were talking, which neither of them mentioned. Probably 3 weeks, he said. Maybe 4. All right, Evelyn said. She walked away and didn't make anything of it, because making something of it would have ruined it. That evening at dinner, Nolan ate at the table instead of in the kitchen. He didn't say much, but he was there. Wade noticed. He caught Evelyn's eye across the table and didn't say anything either, which was how she learned that Wade Callahan communicated a great deal without using words, and that she had apparently already started paying attention. The supply contracts were a disaster. Not an obvious disaster. A careful one, which was worse. Wade found it in the second week while he was going through 3 years of purchasing records with the focused attention of a man who has spent most of his life watching where money goes because he's never had enough of it to waste. Your grain supplier, he said, spreading the ledgers across the library table where Evelyn was working. Look at the delivery weights. She looked. She'd looked at these numbers before. She was about to say so. Not the totals, he said. The per delivery weight, against the contracted quantity. She looked again, and then she saw it. Small discrepancies. Per delivery, 3 to 8% under the contracted weight. Multiplied across 4 years of twice-monthly deliveries, it was not a small number. Hargrove, she said. Hargrove, he agreed. Edmund Hargrove had been the estate's primary grain supplier since her grandfather's time. He was a member of 2 of the same social clubs as Thaddeus. She had always found him aggressively friendly, in the way of men who have something to protect. How long has this been happening? She said. Wade turned 3 pages. At least since your grandfather got sick, he said. Before that, the numbers are clean. She sat back. He waited until Gerald couldn't look at the records himself. And whoever was managing the purchasing after that either didn't notice or didn't want to. She thought about the purchasing manager she'd inherited. A man named Collins who had worked for her grandfather and wore an expression of permanent vague stress and had, she realized now, never once suggested auditing the supply contracts. How much, she said. Wade had already done the calculation. He turned the paper so she could read it. She looked at the number. I'll need documentation, she said, when she could speak steadily. Everything. Before I confront anyone, I know, Wade said. I've got 2 more ledgers to go through. He went back to the records. She watched him for a moment, this man at her library table, with ink on his fingers, and his coat draped over the chair back, working through her grandfather's papers with the patient, thorough attention of someone who has decided that this matters. And she thought something she immediately set aside because the contract was 30 days, and she was 13 days in, and it was too early to be thinking things like that. She went back to her own work. Outside the library door, she was fairly sure she heard Maisie telling Toby not to listen at keyholes, followed by the sound of small footsteps moving away at speed. The social's response to the marriage was not subtle. 3 of the estate's neighboring families, the Aldersons, the Creightons, and a woman named Vera Paulson, who had no ranch but had opinions about everyone who did, sent calling cards that managed to be technically polite and unmistakably cold at the same time. Kind of calling cards that said, "We are acknowledging your existence," and no more than that. 2 other families sent nothing. One, the Drummond family, whose patriarch had known Gerald Marlowe for 40 years, sent a note that said simply, "Gerald always did know what he was about. I trust you do too," which Evelyn read twice and then folded carefully and put in her desk drawer. The territorial paper ran a short piece. Evelyn had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the specific language, which described Wade as a day laborer of no particular standing, which was both technically accurate and designed to be cutting, and which she found, when she read it, produced in her a clean and specific anger that surprised her with its intensity. She did not show Wade the article. He found it on his own, because Percy had left it in the barn, and he came to find her in the east paddock, where she was discussing fencing with one of the hands. He waited until the hand had moved off. "I've been called worse," he said. "That doesn't make it acceptable," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it doesn't change anything either." He looked at the fence line. "The Creightons will pull their grazing agreement if you don't manage this carefully." They were already looking for a reason. She looked at him. "You know the Creightons? Rented a parcel from them 3 years ago. Couldn't make the payments after the cattle loss." He said it without shame. Just information. "Harlan Creighton is a man who needs to feel he's dealing with equals, or he checks out. He doesn't think I'm one. What do you suggest?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Invite them to dinner," he said. "Not a formal dinner. Something in the kitchen. Let him see how the ranch actually runs. Men like Harlan respect practical things more than social things, but they need the social thing to happen first before they'll pay attention to the practical." She thought about it. "You'd sit at that table knowing what he thinks of you." "I've sat at harder tables," Wade said. There was something in the way he said it that was not self-pity and not bravado either. Just a man who had assessed the cost of a thing and decided it was payable. "All right," she said. "I'll send the invitation tomorrow." The Creighton dinner happened 5 days later. Harlan Creighton was 60, rectangular, in the way of men who have spent a lifetime outdoors, and he shook Wade's hand when they met in the entry hall with the handshake of a man testing something. Wade shook back the same way, not competing, just present, and something in Harlan's expression recalibrated without moving. At the table, Wade asked about the Creighton herd's winter feed situation, because he'd heard there was a problem with one of their suppliers, which there was, which meant he'd been paying attention to county business in a way that Harlan hadn't expected. And by the time the meal was half done, they were talking cattle, and Evelyn was watching Harlan Creighton slowly update his inventory of who Wade Callahan was. Harlan's wife, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Ruth, sat next to Maisie and spent the first 20 minutes quietly observing, and then spent the rest of the evening in focused conversation with the 9-year-old about horses, having discovered that Maisie had views on the subject that were worth hearing. After they left, Harlan stopped at the door and looked back at Wade. "You did good work on the Miller parcel before you lost it," he said. "I heard the yield numbers. That wasn't bad management. That was bad weather and a creditor with no patience." Wade looked at him steadily. "That's about right," he said. "Well," Harlan put on his hat. "The grazing agreement stands." When the door closed, Evelyn stood in the hallway and let herself breathe. "How did you know about his feed supplier problem?" she said. "Percy told me," Wade said. "Percy knows everything that happens in this county." "Talk to him more." She had managed this estate for 3 years, and she had never in those years had a real conversation with Percy. "I'll add it to the list," she said. Wade almost smiled. It was becoming familiar, that almost. Maisie found the injured foal on a Tuesday morning. It was in the far corner of the south pasture, a 3-week-old that had gotten separated from its mother during the previous night's wind and somehow ended up on the wrong side of a fence with a gash on its foreleg that was not life-threatening, but was not nothing either. Maisie found it because she'd gotten into the habit of checking the south pasture in the mornings, which she'd started doing on her own initiative, which nobody had asked her to do. She came back to the house at a run and told Evelyn before she told anyone else. Evelyn didn't know why possibly, because Wade was in the barn, and Maisie wanted to handle it without invoking her father, which said something about a 9-year-old girl's investment in her own competence. They went together. Evelyn had some experience with animal medicine, enough to know what the wound needed, and enough to know that what Maisie was doing, intuitively keeping her voice low, keeping her body sideways, moving slowly without jerking, was exactly right. "Where did you learn that?" Evelyn asked, while they were cleaning the wound. "Watching Papa," Maisie said. "He talks to them like they can understand." "Maybe they can," Evelyn said. "They can understand the tone," Maisie said. "That's what he says. They might not know the words, but they know if you mean it." They worked in silence for a while. The foals stood for it, shaking occasionally but tolerating their hands. "Can I ask you something?" Maisie said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "When the year is over—" She stopped. She was cleaning the wound with careful little strokes and not looking up. "Are we going to have to leave?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. She thought about giving a better answer, a more comfortable one. She didn't. That's the honest answer. I don't know. Maisie nodded. She'd expected honest, and honest was what she'd gotten, and something in her posture settled slightly, as if the uncertainty, at least, was preferable to a reassurance she couldn't trust. "Toby likes it here," she said. "I know. He stopped having the dream," Maisie said. "The one where we're in the wagon. Where Mama—" She stopped again. "He had it almost every week before. He hasn't had it since we came here." Evelyn did not say anything right away, because some things need a moment before language is the right response. "I'm glad," she said when she could. Maisie looked up. Her face was 9 years old and about 15 in the eyes, that particular compression of age that happens to children who've had to do adult feeling things before they were ready. "Me too," she said. They brought the foal back between them, walking slowly across the south pasture in the morning light, and when they came through the barn gate, Nolan was there, and he took one look at the foal's leg and said, "I'll clean it again tonight," which was not a question, and which meant he'd already decided the foal was his responsibility, which meant the south pasture now had 2 unofficial early morning inspectors. Evelyn didn't point this out. She just went to find Mrs. Holt and ask about some additional medical supplies. Thaddeus came back 18 days after the wedding. He didn't come to the house this time. He came to Horace Finch's office and filed a formal challenge to the validity of the marriage. Citing insufficient legitimacy of union, a phrase Horace explained to Evelyn meant Thaddeus intended to argue the marriage was a legal performance rather than a genuine one. Horace told her in person, in her own library, with the ledgers still spread across the table from that morning's work. He'll argue that no court would recognize a marriage entered into purely as a financial arrangement to circumvent a trust condition, Horace said. He's found a precedent in an 1,871 territorial case. It's not strong precedent, but it exists. What does he need to prove? Evelyn said. Intent, Horace said, that you both knew at the time of marriage that the union was designed solely to satisfy the trust and no genuine partnership was intended. Can he prove that? Horace looked at his hands. He's subpoenaed your household staff, he said. He's looking for anyone who can testify that you and Wade maintain separate arrangements, that the marriage functions in name only. He paused. He's also, I'm told, pulled a copy of a document. An original agreement between you and Mr. Callahan. Evelyn went still. How did he get that? I don't know, Horace said. But if the original contract surfaces in a hearing the one with the specific financial terms outlined, it will look exactly like what Thaddeus wants it to look like. The room was quiet. Wade was in the north pasture. She'd been with him at 6 that morning going over the grazing rotation, arguing about whether to move the main herd before the first hard frost or wait another 2 weeks. And he'd been wrong about the timing, and she'd told him so, and he'd told her she might be right, and to let him look at the rainfall records again. And that had been the morning. Just 2 people disagreeing over cattle in a field, and none of it felt like a legal performance. She thought about Maisie in the south pasture. She thought about Toby and the bucket named Gerald and the sitting room with the wooden horse. She thought about Nolan's standing at the stall gate with the nervous mare shifting toward him. She thought about Wade's packed saddlebags, still sitting by the barn door because he hadn't fully unpacked his personal things yet, a detail she had noticed and not said anything about. "What do we do?" she said. Horace had been a lawyer for 31 years, and he had the voice of a man who has delivered difficult information before and learned to do it without decoration. "You demonstrate a genuine marriage," he said. "You do that by living like one. Not performing one, living one." Which means he stopped. "Evelyn, if there are aspects of this arrangement that remain at arm's length, that's what Thaddeus is going to find, and he will find them if they exist." She looked at the table. "Tell me about the hearing timeline," she said. Told her. She listened, and when he left, she sat in the library for a long time, with the afternoon light changing on the walls, and the fire settling and the sounds of the house around her. "Toby, somewhere asking Percy about something, Mrs. Holt in the hall speaking to one of the kitchen staff, and, distantly, from the direction of the north pasture, the sound of horses moving." She went to find Wade. He was at the fence line exactly where she expected, looking at the ground with the expression he used when he was thinking about something he hadn't finished thinking about yet. Told him about Thaddeus. All of it. The challenge, the subpoena, the contract. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had learned about him in 18 days, that he did not interrupt when a person was giving him information he needed. When she finished, he looked out at the field. "He got the contract," Wade said. "Not a question. Yes. That was my fault," he said. "Kept a copy. At the cabin, he was quiet. I shouldn't have done that." "You had every reason to keep a copy of a legal document," she said. "I know. I still should have thought about where it was." She looked at him. The late afternoon light was doing what it does in Montana in October, going orange and sideways. And it was not a good time of day for trying to have a professional conversation, because something about the light made everything feel less professional. "Horace says we need to live like a real marriage," she said. "Not perform one." Wade turned to look at her. And I don't know how to do that," she said, flat. "No decoration. I know how to manage an estate. I know how to deal with Thaddeus. I know how to read supply contracts and argue about grazing rotations. I don't know how to—" She stopped. "Be married," he said. "Be anything but practical," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I think you know more about it than you think," he said. "You sat outside Toby's room last night when he had the dream. You were there when he woke up. You didn't make a thing of it. She had thought that was private. He told you," she said. "Told Maisie. Maisie told me." Wade looked back at the field. "That's not nothing, Evelyn." She stood with him at the fence for a while without saying anything. The horses moved in the far pasture. The light kept going orange. Something that lived in the fence post made a small sound and stopped. "My saddlebags are still by the barn door," he said. "I noticed," she said. "I should probably move them inside." "Probably," she said. Another silence. Not an uncomfortable one, which was itself a kind of information. "The north herd," Wade said. "I looked at the rainfall records. You were right about the timing." "I know," she said. He made a sound that was close enough to a laugh that she counted it. They walked back to the house together in the failing light, not saying much. And when they came through the kitchen door, Toby looked up from the table, where he was drawing something elaborate on a piece of paper, and said, "Papa, Evelyn," I named the other bucket. "His name is Frank. Gerald and Frank are brothers." "That's good to know," Wade said. "Very important information," Evelyn agreed. Toby returned to his drawing, satisfied, and Wade Callahan picked up his saddlebags from beside the barn door and carried them inside the house, and nobody made anything of it, because some things are better when nobody makes anything of them. But Nolan, who was in the hallway when it happened, watched his father carry those bags past him and up the stairs, and the expression on his face was not the expression he'd arrived with 14 days ago. And though he didn't say anything about it then or later, something in him had shifted slightly, the way a compass shifts when it's getting closer to true north, not all the way there yet, but moving. Outside, the first true cold of the season settled over the Marlowe estate, and the cattle in the north pasture pressed together against it, and the fence line that needed repair had not yet been repaired. And somewhere in the county Thaddeus Crowell sat in a warm office and looked at a document and planned his next move. But inside the kitchen, the lamp was lit, and there were 4 people around a table and a bucket named Gerald and a bucket named Frank. And the house that had been very large and very quiet for a very long time was neither of those things anymore. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of November, which gave Thaddeus 3 weeks to build his case and gave Evelyn 3 weeks to undo it. He was methodical. She had always known he was methodical. It was the thing about him that was most dangerous, more dangerous than his money or his connections, or his willingness to use both without apparent discomfort. He didn't attack directly, he assembled. He found the people on the edges of a situation and worked them like a man tightening a fence, pulling each wire a little tighter until the whole line had tension. The household staff received his subpoenas on a Wednesday. Evelyn knew about it before noon because Mrs. Holt came to her directly, which she would not have done 3 weeks earlier, and told her in the specific, careful language of a woman who is angry on someone else's behalf and is trying not to show it. "He's asking about sleeping arrangements," Mrs. Holt said. "Meal arrangements. Whether Mr. Callahan takes meals with the family or separately. Whether he has a study or he used the phrase gentleman's quarters. Her expression said everything her language was too careful to say. "I told his man that I answer to you and no one else until I'm in front of a judge." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "I also told him that in 19 years with this family I have never seen this house run better than it has in the past 3 weeks, which is not testimony. It's an observation. I made it anyway." Evelyn looked at her. "Mrs. Holt," she said. "Miss Marlowe," the housekeeper said, and went back to her work. Percy, when questioned by Thaddeus's man at the gate, reportedly said that Mr. Callahan knew more about cattle than any man he'd worked under in 40 years, and that he was welcome to write that down if he wanted. The man had apparently wanted something different. Percy had apparently not cared. Thaddeus's investigator also went to the county recorder's office and pulled every financial record connected to Wade Callahan for the past 5 years, which Evelyn learned from Horace, who learned it from the recorder himself, who was a man named Albert Briggs, and who had known Gerald Marlowe, and who was apparently keeping score. What Thaddeus found in those records was exactly what was there: a man who had worked hard in difficult years and lost ground anyway, not through bad decisions, but through the specific cruelty of bad timing, which is a different thing, and which the records couldn't entirely show. He found the debts, which were now cleared. He found the cleared debts, and used them as evidence of transaction, which Horace said was the expected move, and also the most cynical one. "He's going to stand in front of a judge and argue that you purchased a husband," Horace told Evelyn. That the financial arrangement was not incidental to the marriage, but constitutive of it. "And what do we argue back?" Wade said. He was at the library table, which had become, over the past 3 weeks, essentially his workspace as much as hers, papers on his side and papers on hers, and the occasional overlap in the middle where a problem required both of them. Horace looked at him. "We argue that a marriage's origins don't determine its nature. That what began as a practical arrangement has become a genuine partnership." He paused. "We'll need to demonstrate that, not just assert it." "What does demonstration look like?" Evelyn said. "Testimony," Horace said. "From people who have observed you, and from the 2 of you directly." He was quiet for a moment. "A judge is going to look at both of you and make a determination about what he sees. That's the reality of it. You can have the strongest legal argument in the territory and lose if the man on the bench doesn't believe what he's looking at." After Horace left, they sat in the library without talking for a while. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside, the first serious cold of November was making itself known in the way the window frames contracted slightly, and the draft came under the east door. "He's going to put us on the stand," Wade said. Yes. And ask us things that are designed to make it look like we're strangers who made a business deal. Yes. Wade looked at the fire. Are we? He said. Evelyn looked at him. Are we strangers? He said. Not rhetorically. An actual question, the kind a man asks when he needs an actual answer. No, she said. It came out without deliberation, which was its own kind of answer. He nodded. He didn't say anything else, and she didn't either. And the fire made the sounds fires make when they're going out, and neither of them moved to add wood. The man Thaddeus sent to see Wade came on a Thursday afternoon, while Evelyn was in town at Horace's office going over documents. He arrived at the estate in a plain carriage, with no markings, which Percy noted and mentioned afterward, and he asked to speak with Mr. Callahan privately. Wade met him in the yard. The man was around 50, well-dressed without being flashy, and he had the practiced ease of someone who delivers propositions professionally. He introduced himself as an associate of Mr. Crowell's no name offered, which Wade also noted, and he got to the point without preamble, which Wade had to give him credit for. Mr. Crowell is prepared to offer you a substantial sum, the man said. In addition to the debts already cleared, which remain yours regardless, he would provide you and your children a settlement sufficient to establish yourselves comfortably. Permanently, anywhere in the territory you choose. Wade looked at him. In exchange for, he said. Vacating the marriage, the man said. Whatever legal mechanism is cleanest. Mr. Crowell's attorneys would handle all the paperwork. You would face no legal complications. Your children would be provided for generously. He let that sit for a moment. You'd be going back to the life you had before, Mr. Callahan, with significantly better means to live it. The yard was quiet. Somewhere behind the barn, Toby was having a conversation with one of the horses. Wade could hear it without being able to make out the words, just the rhythm of a small boy explaining something important to an animal that was being patient about it. I'm going to need you to leave now, Wade said. The man showed no reaction. Mr. Crowell anticipated that initial response. He asked me to tell you. I said I need you to leave, Wade said. The same tone, the same level. That's not an initial response. That's the only response. The man looked at him for a moment, recalibrating. Then he picked up his hat, which he had removed when he introduced himself, and put it back on. Mr. Crowell will proceed with the legal challenge in that case. I expect he will, Wade said. He watched the carriage leave through the gate, and Percy appeared at his elbow with 2 cups of coffee, which he had apparently prepared in anticipation. What did he want? Percy said. Offered me money to leave, Wade said. Percy handed him a cup. How much? Enough. Percy was quiet for a moment. But not enough, he said. No, Wade said, not enough. He told Evelyn that evening, directly and without softening it, because she needed to know, and because he had decided early in this arrangement that whatever else it would not be one where important information got managed for someone else's comfort. She listened without interrupting. How much did he offer? She said when he finished. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then that's more than the debts. Considerably, Wade said. She looked at her hands. You could have taken it. I know. You had reasons to, she said, not as an accusation, as a fact. A year ago, you were facing eviction. This was supposed to be a 1-year arrangement. He was offering you more than the year would have given you, and a clean exit. I know what he was offering, Wade said. Then why? Because it was Thaddeus offering it, Wade said. Because of what it would have meant for the valley, the grazing families, the river crossing access. Because of what it would have meant for you. He stopped. He was looking at the table, not at her, and because Toby stopped having nightmares. And I'm not going to be the reason they start again. Kitchen was very quiet. Wade, she said. It wasn't a hard decision, he said. I need you to understand that. It wasn't a hard decision. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, it was for most men. He didn't have an answer for that. He picked up his coffee and looked out the window at the dark yard and didn't say anything. And Evelyn sat at the table and felt something she had been carefully not naming for 3 weeks shift slightly toward the surface. And she pushed it back down because there was a hearing in 8 days and a legal challenge that could take everything, and a cousin who had just demonstrated that he would pay significant money to win, and this was not the time. She was good at this was not the time. She had a lot of practice. The first fence came down 4 days before the hearing. It was the North Range, the section that Wade had flagged in his second week when he'd walked the boundary and noted that 3 posts were undersunk, and the wire had rust damage at the splice points. Put it on the repair list. The repair list was long. Things on the bottom of it were still waiting. Percy found it at first light. The wire down along a 40-foot stretch, the posts not rotted out or wind damaged, but pulled the holes beside them showed it. The way the ground was disturbed where something had levered them up deliberately. 300 head of cattle in the north pasture had moved through the gap sometime in the night, following their nature toward lower ground, toward the creek drainage that ran into the ravine. Percy rode back at a gallop and came into the kitchen where Evelyn and Wade were at the table with the morning maps, which had become their daily ritual. And he said what he'd found in 4 words, and the room was already moving before he finished saying them. Wade had the horses out in the time it takes to explain why you need horses. He and 3 ranch hands rode for the North Range, and Evelyn followed on her own horse because it was her land and her cattle, and the idea of remaining inside had not been seriously considered. The morning was clear and brutal cold, the kind of cold that comes before a storm rather than with one, the air thin and sharp and the ground iron-hard. They could see the cattle from the ridge the herd had scattered along the drainage below the north fence, moving in the fidgety, directionless way of cattle that have found themselves somewhere unfamiliar and are not handling it well. The ravine was a mile further east. It had frozen along the edges, but the center was still moving water over rock, and 300 cattle moving toward it in the dark or in a panic was not a loss in progress, but a disaster waiting on timing. "We need to turn the lead animals," Wade said to the hands, scanning the herd from the ridge. "Don't chase from behind. You'll push them faster. Get around the front quarter." He was already moving as he said it, angling down the ridge slope on the east side to cut ahead of the herd's drift. 2 of the hands went with him. The third stayed with Evelyn on the ridge, which Wade had not said and had not needed to say. Evelyn watched them work. Then she stopped watching and started thinking. She had grown up on this land. She had ridden every acre of it with her grandfather before she was 12. She knew, in the back of her memory, where things learned young, lived permanently, that there was a service trail not on any current map. An old irrigation access route from the early years of the ranch that cut behind the east ridgeline and came down into a natural bowl that channeled toward the home pasture. Her grandfather had used it to move cattle the long way around when the main routes were flooded. Nobody had used it in 15 years. It might be overgrown. It might be washed out. It might also be the only route that put riders ahead of the herd rather than beside them. "Hold here," she told the hand beside her, and she was already riding before he could argue, going east along the top of the ridge, looking for the gap in the tree line that marked the old trailhead. She found it where she remembered it, half buried in scrub brush, still there. She pushed through the brush at a canter, and the trail opened under her, narrow but solid, the old ruts still visible under the frost. And she came around the back of the ridge and down into the bowl in 8 minutes, which put her exactly where she needed to be. Could hear the cattle below her and the rider's shouts and the specific sound a herd makes when it's being turned half cooperation and half complaint. She positioned herself at the natural pinch point of the bowl and held her horse steady and waited. The first animals came around the base of the ridge and saw her and stopped. When cattle stop, the animals behind them stop or redirect. It was not a clean process. It was not a quiet one. But the drift toward the ravine broke, and the herd began folding back on itself, and Wade came around the far side of the bowl and saw her there, and his horse pulled up short. He looked at her across the herd. She looked back at him. "Old irrigation trail," she said when he was close enough. "You could have broken your neck on that ridge," he said. "Trail was solid," she said. "You didn't know that until you were already on it. If I'd waited to know, the cattle would have been in the ravine." He looked at her. He looked at the herd, which was still moving, but now moving the right direction. He looked back at her. "Your grandfather teach you that trail?" he said. "Yes," she said. "He taught you well," Wade said. Not effusive. Just accurate. They moved the herd together. The 4 of them. back through the gap in the north fence and into the secured pasture took 2 hours and required more language than was polite, and at one point required Evelyn to ride directly into the middle of a knot of stubborn animals and push them physically through because they had decided that the pasture gate was suspicious and were not going in without argument. By the time they had the fence temporarily repaired with materials from the repair kit, on the pack horse a proper fix would need to wait for daylight, and the full crew the morning had gone to midday and the cold had gotten serious. They were riding back when one of the hands said, "There's tracks, mister." Callahan, over by the pulled posts, boot tracks and something else. Looked like a pry bar mark in the post hole. Nobody said Thaddeus's name. Nobody needed to. It was Nolan who found the payment instructions. He had come after them, which he was not supposed to do, which Wade discovered after the herd was secured, and they were accounting for everyone. And Nolan appeared at the pasture gate with mud to his knees and the expression of a person who knows he's going to get in trouble and has decided it's worth it. Wade looked at his son. "I told you to stay at the house," he said. "I know," Nolan said. "I told you specifically. I know, Papa." Nolan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But I came across the east fence line, and I found this by the pulled posts. It was wedged under a rock. I think it fell out of someone's pocket." Wade took the paper. He unfolded it. Evelyn came around her horse and read it over his shoulder. It was a payment receipt, the kind used by commercial banks. Made out to a man whose name Evelyn didn't immediately recognize, for an amount that was not small. From an account she did recognize one of Thaddeus's subsidiary business accounts that she'd seen referenced in the estate's old shared banking records from before Gerald's death. In the memo line, in handwriting that was not the bank's printed hand, north fence. Thursday night. The cold air seemed to get colder. Wade looked at his son. "You walked the east fence line, alone in the dark." "It wasn't totally dark," Nolan said. "There was moon." "Nolan, I knew the trail. I've walked it 4 times this week." He met his father's eyes, which required something, because Wade was not an easy man to meet directly when he was concerned. "I wasn't going to stay at the house while all of you were out here." "I'm 14. Being 14 doesn't make you indestructible," Wade said. "I know that," Nolan said. "But I'm not going to be the kind of person who stays safe inside while the people I—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that he wasn't ready to say. "While everyone else is out here. I'm not." The pasture was quiet. One of the hands had the sense to find somewhere else to be. Evelyn looked at Nolan. He was looking at his father, but she was aware of the word he hadn't finished. "People I." She filed it somewhere careful. Wade looked at the paper in his hand. Then he looked at his son for a long moment, with an expression that had the full complexity of what it is to love someone who is becoming their own person, and to feel proud and afraid at exactly the same time. "You don't walk fence lines alone at night again," Wade said. "That's not a negotiation." "All right," Nolan said. "But you did well," Wade said, "finding this." Nolan straightened slightly. It was not a large movement. It meant a great deal. Horace Finch looked at the payment instructions the next morning with the specific expression of a lawyer who has just watched the opposing side's case develop a significant problem. "The handwriting will need to be matched," he said, "and the account will need to be subpoenaed. But if this links directly to Thaddeus Crowell's authorizations—" "It's his handwriting," Evelyn said. She had looked at it for a long time the night before. She had seen Thaddeus's handwriting on documents all her life. "I'd stake the estate on it." "You may be," Horace said, which was not humor, just accuracy. "Can we get this into the hearing?" Wade said. "If we can establish provenance where it was found. By whom, under what circumstances, yes. It speaks not just to the fence sabotage, but to the broader pattern of interference. A judge who sees a man challenging a marriage's legitimacy while simultaneously paying someone to destroy that family's livelihood is going to have questions." He set the paper down carefully, the way he set down things that matter. "This changes the character of the hearing considerably." Evelyn looked at the paper on Horace's desk. She thought about Thaddeus in her grandfather's study 3 days before Gerald died, using Gerald's pen, writing his timeline. She thought about every suitor he'd sent to her parlor, every calling card, every piece of pressure he'd applied through lawyers and clerks and associates without names. She thought about the fence line in the dark, and 300 cattle drifting toward a frozen ravine. He's desperate, she said. He is, Horace agreed. Which means he'll do something else before the hearing, Wade said. Horace looked at him. Probably. Then we make sure the house is secure, Wade said. Barn. The north herds in the secured pasture now keep them there. Full fence walk twice a day until after the hearing. He was not asking Evelyn for permission. He was thinking out loud and including her in it, which was different and which she recognized as different. Percy and 2 hands can handle the perimeter. I'll take the north section mornings. I'll take the east section with you, Evelyn said. He looked at her. I know the trail, she said, and it's my fence. A beat. 6 o'clock, he said. 5:30, she said. 5:30, he agreed. Horace was looking at his desk. I've known this family 30 years, he said, to nobody in particular. Gerald would have liked this. Neither of them responded to that. The silence was not a disagreeing silence. The storm hit 2 days before the hearing, and it was not the gradual kind. Montana produces storms that arrive like decisions fully formed, immediate, committed. This one came down from the Canadian border overnight, and by morning, the snow was horizontal, and the temperature had dropped that the water in the barn troughs had ice on it by 7 o'clock, despite the animals' heat. They had secured the cattle. They had walked the fences. They were as prepared as preparation allows when weather decides to test it. What they had not prepared for was Nolan. At 9 in the morning, in the full heart of the blizzard, with visibility at 40 feet, and the wind doing what wind does in open Montana country when it has nothing to stop it, Percy came into the kitchen and told Wade that Nolan was not in the barn, not in the stable, not in the house, and that one of the horses was missing. The kitchen went very quiet. He was here at breakfast, Maisie said. Her voice was steady, but her face was not. When did you last see him? Wade said. 7, she said. He said he was going to check the north fence. She stopped. I told him you said not to go alone. He said you said not to go alone at night. It was technically accurate. It was also exactly how a 14-year-old boy thinks. Wade was already moving. Evelyn was already behind him. She caught his arm at the kitchen door. 2 people, 2 routes, she said. You take the direct line. I'll take the irrigation trail. If he went to the north fence, he'll be somewhere between them. He looked at her. I know that land in a blizzard, she said. My grandfather walked me through every fence line on this property in every weather. I know where the windbreaks are. I know where the ground drops. She held his eyes. You'll cover more ground this way. A second pass that had several things in it. Stay on the ridge, he said. If visibility drops below 20 feet, you come back. Same to you, she said. They rode out into the white. Blizzard was serious in the way that makes you understand why people who underestimate Montana weather tend not to make the same mistake twice. Evelyn kept her face low and followed the ridge by feel as much as sight, her horse steady under her because it was a good horse and she had chosen it for exactly this kind of day. The irrigation trail was passable but barely, the snow filling it fast, and she moved along the east ridgeline with one eye on the ground and one eye on the space ahead where visibility allowed it. She heard him before she saw him, not words, the sound a horse makes when it's uncertain of its footing, and communicating that uncertainty, a particular kind of snort and shift. She turned toward the sound and came through a stand of scrub pine and found Nolan on foot, leading his horse by the bridle, the horse's right foreleg testing the ground with each step. The horse had come up lame. Not badly, a twisted fetlock from a snow-covered rock. She assessed quickly, but enough that Nolan had been walking, for however long it took the horse to start favoring it, which in a blizzard, alone, at 14, was not nothing. He looked up and saw her, and something in his face did something that he immediately controlled, the specific effort of a boy who is genuinely frightened and has decided that showing it completely is not an option. I found a cut, he said. His voice was steady. She gave him credit for it. East corner post. Someone's been at the wire again. I was going to mark it and come back. All right, she said. She dismounted. She looked at his horse's leg, confirmed her assessment, and looked at him. Can you ride double? Yes, he said. Then get up first. You're colder than I am. You don't have to, Nolan. She said it the way his father said it, not harsh, just final. Get up. He got up. She led his horse behind them and rode back toward the estate through the blizzard, and the boy behind her was rigid with the effort of not leaning against her, because he was 14 and that had its own particular pride, and she did not comment on it. And after about 5 minutes, he stopped being rigid, because being rigid in a blizzard is not sustainable, and he leaned forward slightly with his forehead almost against her shoulder blade. She kept riding. "I just wanted to be useful," he said, into the back of her coat, barely audible over the wind. "I know," she said. "Everyone was doing something." "Papa was on the north section. You were going to the east. I thought if I checked the corner post. You found a cut wire," she said. "That's not nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "Is Papa going to be very angry?" he said. "Probably," she said. "He's also going to be very relieved." "Both at the same time. You'll have to stand for both." Pause. "Are you angry?" he said. She thought about it honestly, because he was the kind of person who would know if she gave him an easy answer. "I was frightened," she said. "That's not the same as angry." "But I was frightened." He was quiet for the rest of the ride. When they came through the estate gate, Wade was already back, already in the yard, and he saw them from 50 feet, and the thing that crossed his face in that moment was not something she would ever describe to anyone. Because it was private, and she knew it was private even though she was there to see it. He helped Nolan down. He held him by the shoulders and looked at him. Then he pulled him in briefly and let go, the way fathers do when they need to hold on, and also need their son to know the holding wasn't weakness. "We'll talk about this inside," Wade said. "I know," Nolan said. "You found a cut wire," Evelyn said to Wade, over Nolan's head. Wade looked at her. She held up 2 fingers, second incident. His expression did what it needed to do, and then settled into the thing they both needed it to be, which was focused. "Percy," he said, "take the boy's horse to the barn." Gentle on that leg, he looked at Nolan inside now. They went inside. An hour later, with Nolan thawed and lectured, and in possession of both his father's anger and his father's relief, Horace arrived through the storm with news. The man whose name was on the payment receipt had been located. He had, when presented with the evidence and the alternative of facing criminal charges alone, talked at considerable length about who had hired him, what he had been instructed to do, and who had given the instruction in what specific handwriting on what specific piece of paper. He had also mentioned a second job, a job that had not yet been completed. Horace set his hat on the entry table and looked at Evelyn. "Thaddeus arranged to have someone approach one of your foremen," he said, "to falsify records showing that the cattle operation was being mismanaged prior to the marriage, to make it appear the estate was already failing before Mr. Callahan arrived." He paused. The foreman refused. "Came forward this morning. He's willing to testify." Evelyn stood in her own hallway and felt the shape of the thing become clear. Thaddeus had been building this for years, not just since Gerald died. Since before. He had been patient and methodical, and he had believed, completely and without doubt, that eventually the right pressure at the right point would produce the right result, because in his experience, that was how the world worked. You applied pressure. Things moved. What he had not calculated was that the things he was applying pressure to had stopped moving the way he expected. "When does the hearing start?" she said. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Horace said. "Then we have tonight," Evelyn said. She turned and found Wade at the hallway door, and Nolan behind him, and Maisie behind Nolan, and Toby in the back, too short to see over his siblings, attempting to get information by feel. "What's happening?" Toby said. "Tomorrow there's going to be a hearing," Evelyn said. She said it to all of them, because they deserved to know. "A judge is going to decide whether this family has the right to stay on this land. And I believe we are going to win, but I want you to know what tomorrow is." Toby thought about this. "Is the judge going to be mean?" he said. "The judge is going to be fair," Evelyn said. "That's all we need." Toby considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Okay," he said. "Can we have soup?" Maisie put her hand on his shoulder. Wade looked at Evelyn across the hallway, and in his face was something she had no business naming at 8 o'clock the night before a hearing that could take everything. She named it anyway. She named it quietly, in the private room of herself, and she kept it there, and she went to help Mrs. Holt with the soup, and outside the blizzard pressed against the windows, and the cattle were secured, and the fences were as sound as they could be made. And in the morning, a man who had spent years believing that pressure was the same as power was going to find out what happened when the things you push decide to push back. The blizzard broke sometime before dawn, the way Montana storms often do, not gradually but all at once, as if the weather had made a decision. By the time Evelyn came downstairs at 5 o'clock, the sky was clear, and the stars were the hard, bright kind that only appear after that kind of cold, and the snow on the yard was an unmarked white that would not stay unmarked for long. She had not slept much. She was aware of not having slept much, and was choosing not to make it into a problem, which was a skill her grandfather had taught her by example rather than instruction. Gerald Marlowe had faced difficult mornings by simply getting up and beginning them, and she had inherited that if nothing else. Wade was already in the kitchen. She had stopped being surprised by this. He had the maps out, not the ranch maps. The county maps, the ones that showed the road to the territorial courthouse in Harding, 12 miles east, and the 2 creek crossings that the overnight snow had certainly not improved. He was drinking coffee and looking at the route with the expression he used for problems that were solvable if approached correctly. "Roads will be bad," he said when she came in. "I know. We should leave by 6:30. "I was thinking 6, she said. He looked up. 6, he agreed. She poured coffee and sat across from him, and they looked at the maps together for a while without saying much, which was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have run out of planning and are now simply waiting for the thing to start. "Horace will be there before us," she said. "He said 8 o'clock. He'll be there at 7. The foreman who came forward, Briggs." "Garrett," Wade corrected. "Thomas Garrett. The foreman is Thomas Garrett. Briggs is the county recorder. Thomas Garrett," she said. She had been awake enough last night to get that wrong, which was not like her. "Will he hold?" "Horace says yes. He came forward voluntarily, which is different from someone who got caught and is bargaining. A man who comes forward because he thinks it's the right thing is generally harder to shake." "Generally," Evelyn said. "Generally," Wade agreed. Coffee was hot, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the stars were going, the sky beginning to lighten at the eastern edge, in that pale particular way of winter mornings in northern Montana. It was quiet enough to hear the horses shift in the stable. "How are you?" Wade said. She looked at him. It was a plain question, and she gave it a plain answer. "Nervous," she said. "I don't usually get nervous." "I don't like that I am." "You're about to walk into a room where someone is going to try to take your home and your life's work using your own decisions as the weapon," he said. "Nervous seems like the right response." "What about you?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the map. "I've been in rooms where men decided things about me before," he said. "What land I could rent, whether I could make payments, whether my children could stay somewhere." He paused. "I don't like those rooms, but I know how to sit in them." She looked at him across the table and thought about all the rooms like that he had sat in, alone, with 3 children depending on the outcome, and she thought about the particular endurance that required. Kind that doesn't look like courage because it's too ordinary and too grinding to be called that, but is. "Whatever happens today," she said. "We're going to win," he said. Not bravado. "Just assessment. You don't know that," she said. "No," he said. "But I know what we're bringing into that room. And I know what he's bringing. And I'd rather have ours." She almost said something. She stopped herself. The morning was too early and the day was too large, and she was nervous, which she had admitted, and some things needed to wait for their proper time. "I'll wake the children," she said. "They don't need to come," Wade said. "I know," she said. "But Nolan should." Wade looked at her. "He found the wire," she said. "He found the payment receipt. He's 14 years old, and he walked a fence line in a blizzard because he decided this family was worth protecting. He should be in the room when it's decided." Something moved in Wade's face that he didn't try to stop. "All right," he said. She went upstairs. They left at 6:15, which was a compromise, in the large estate carriage, because the roads required it, and because Horace had said to arrive in a manner that suggested stability, which was legal advice with a social dimension that Evelyn found slightly absurd and also completely accurate. Nolan sat across from her and Wade and watched the passing landscape with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered to him. He had dressed carefully, which she noticed without commenting on. The same dark coat he'd worn at their courthouse wedding, brushed and buttoned correctly, his boots cleaned. Caught her looking. "Maisie helped me with the coat," he said. "It looks well," Evelyn said. "She said I had to represent the family," he said. He said it with the slight self-consciousness of a boy, quoting a 9-year-old sister who had been entirely correct. "She's right," Evelyn said. The road was as bad as expected. The first creek crossing was manageable. The second had ice at the edges and running water in the center that the horses didn't like, and that required Wade to get down and lead them across on foot, which he did without discussion, his boots in the ice water. And Evelyn did not tell him to be careful, because he already knew to be careful, and she was not his mother. And when he climbed back in, he was wet to the knee, and she handed him the lap blanket from the seat without ceremony, and he took it the same way, and they kept moving. They arrived in Harding at 7:45. Horace was on the courthouse steps, which Evelyn had predicted. He had 2 younger lawyers with him she didn't recognize, and a leather case that she recognized as the one he only brought to proceedings he considered genuinely serious. He looked at all 3 of them as they came up the steps, and his expression was the careful neutral of a man who has been a lawyer long enough to never show what he's actually thinking before a hearing. "Thomas Garrett is inside," he said. "The payment evidence has been logged. The account subpoena came back this morning. The funds traced directly to Crowell's secondary account. Authorized by his signature. Is that enough?" Wade said. "It's significant," Horace said. "Whether it's enough depends on the judge and how the testimony lands." He looked at Evelyn. "Are you ready for what's going to happen in there?" "Tell me," she said. "Thaddeus's attorney is going to try to make this hearing about the original contract. He's going to present you as a woman who engineered a legal performance and present Wade as a man who sold his participation. He's going to be systematic, and he's going to be calm about it, because calm is more damaging than aggressive in front of a judge." He paused. "You will need to testify. Both of you. The judge will want to look at you directly." "What do we say?" Nolan said. All 3 adults looked at him. He had apparently decided he was part of this conversation, which, Evelyn thought, he had earned. "The truth," Horace said, specifically and exactly. Nolan nodded, like that was the answer he'd expected. Courtroom was not large. It was a territorial courthouse in a county seat of moderate size, wood-paneled and practical, with a judge's bench that had seen better decades, and gallery benches that were half full with people who had no particular stake in the outcome but had opinions about it, which in a county this size was essentially everyone. Thaddeus was already seated at the opposing table when they came in. He looked, Evelyn thought, like a man who had already won. Not a man who was confident. A man who had decided the result was settled and was simply going through the procedural requirement of having it confirmed. He had the specific stillness of someone who has never seriously considered losing as a possibility, and she had seen that stillness before in the suitors he'd sent to her parlor, and she had always found it more revealing than the lawyers and the documents and the formal pressure. He looked at her when she sat down, then at Wade. Something behind his expression acknowledged that they were present, but declined to assign them any particular significance. She looked at him steadily until he looked away first. It was a small thing, she noted it anyway. Judge Raymond Alcott was 63, had been on the territorial bench for 11 years, and had the kind of face that gives nothing away, because it has learned that giving things away is a professional liability. He had a white mustache and reading glasses, and a manner of arranging his papers that suggested he considered disorder in any form to be a personal affront. He opened the hearing by reading the challenge in full, in a flat voice that stripped all the drama out of Thaddeus's legal language and left it sounding like what it was, a property claim dressed in procedural clothing. Then he looked at both tables over his glasses. "This is a hearing, not a trial," he said. "I'll hear arguments and testimony, and I'll make a determination based on the trust language and the evidence presented. I don't particularly enjoy being here on a morning after a blizzard, so I'd appreciate everyone saying what needs to be said without saying more than that." He looked at Thaddeus's attorney. "Mr. Finch, proceed." Thaddeus's attorney was a man from Helena named Delacroix, which Evelyn noted as a deliberate choice bringing in outside counsel, said that Thaddeus considered the local bar inadequate or potentially unsympathetic, which was its own kind of signal. Delacroix was 50s, silver-haired, and had the measured pacing of a man who charged by the hour and knew it. He presented the original contract first. He had a clean copy, not the version Nolan had found, a copy that had been obtained through the discovery process, properly certified. He walked Judge Alcott through the financial terms with the patience of a man, explaining something to someone who he believed needed time to understand it, which was itself a choice about how he saw the judge. And Evelyn watched Alcott's expression to see if he registered the condescension. She thought he did. Delacroix called 3 witnesses. 2 were former ranch employees who had left the estate's service in the past year, one of whom testified that he had heard Evelyn describe the marriage as a practical arrangement in conversation, which was true. She had said that, in a specific context that the testimony omitted. The 3rd was a social acquaintance of Thaddeus's who had attended a dinner where Wade had apparently seemed out of place, which Evelyn found both offensive and too vague to be damaging. Then Delacroix called Evelyn. She had known this was coming. She had prepared for it, in the way you prepare for something by understanding that you cannot fully prepare for it, and deciding that steadiness will have to serve instead. She sat in the witness chair and looked at Delacroix and waited. He started with the contract, the terms, the financial specifics, the timeline. He was methodical, as Horace had warned, taking her through each element and asking her to confirm it, which she did, because it was all true, and denying true things in front of a judge was not a strategy. "So you approached Mr. Callahan specifically to fulfill the trust condition," Delacroix said. "I approached him because I believed he was a man of integrity who would deal with me honestly," Evelyn said. "But the purpose of the marriage was to satisfy a legal requirement," she said. "I've never suggested otherwise. The question your client is asking is whether that origin invalidates what the marriage has become, and I'd suggest that's a different question." Delacroix paused. He had not expected her to reframe it that quickly. "And what has it become, in your assessment?" She looked at him. Then, because she was aware of the judge watching, and because she had decided that the only thing she had to offer in this room that could not be challenged or subpoenaed or paid for was exactly what was true, she said it plainly. "Partnership," she said, "a real one, with a man who found fraud in my supply contracts that my own managers missed for 3 years. Who rebuilt the trust of ranching families my grandfather had maintained and my management had allowed to erode. Who rode into a blizzard to save my herd because it was the right thing to do and did not once ask what it meant for him." She kept her voice level. "A partnership with a family, 3 children who have become who are—" She stopped for a moment, not from calculation, but because she hadn't said it plainly before, and the plainness of it was larger than she'd expected. "They are mine," she said, "not by any document, by everything that actually matters." Courtroom was quiet. Delacroix moved on quickly, because a good attorney knows when a moment is working against him. He tried the practical angle next, the sleeping arrangements, which misses. Holt had addressed in prior testimony with such precise and well-chosen language that there was very little left to attack. The financial benefit to Wade, which was documented and real, and which Evelyn confirmed directly, because minimizing it would have been dishonest and obvious. The speed of the courtship, which was not a courtship, which she also confirmed. "In your own words," Delacroix said, "you met this man for the first time during a storm. You visited him 3 days later with a legal contract. You were married within the week. Is that a marriage, Miss Marlowe, or is that a transaction?" "It started as a transaction," she said. "Most things worth having start as something smaller than what they become." Judge Alcott, who had been writing something, stopped writing. Delacroix sat down. Horace stood. He called Wade. Wade sat in the witness chair the way he sat everywhere, like someone who has decided that the chair is part of the situation and the situation will be dealt with. He looked at Horace. He looked at the judge. He did not look at Thaddeus. Horace started simply. "Where did you grow up? What was your work? What happened to your wife?" He let Wade be a person before he let him be a party to a legal challenge, and Alcott listened with the attention of a man who is conducting his own assessment parallel to the legal one. When Miss Marlowe came to your home with the contract, Horace said, "What was your first reaction?" "I thought she was out of her mind," Wade said. A small sound from the gallery that was not quite laughter but adjacent to it. "What changed it?" Horace said. "She told me why she was doing it," Wade said. "Not just the inheritance. What would happen to the valley if Thaddeus Crowell got the estate? The grazing access, the river crossing, the small ranching families who'd lose their margins if that land got sold in parcels." He paused. "And she told me about my children, that whatever happened between us, they would come first. She said it and I believed it, which I didn't expect to, but I did." "Why did you believe it?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Because she wasn't asking me to trust her," he said. "She was telling me what was true. There's a difference. People who are asking you to trust them need something from you. She was just telling me what was going to happen. She'd already decided." "And in the weeks since," Horace said, "has the arrangement remained, in your experience, purely transactional?" Wade looked at the floor for a moment. It was not evasion. It was the look of a man making sure he says the right thing in the right words. "My son found a payment receipt in the snow at a sabotaged fence line," he said, "after riding out alone in a blizzard because he'd decided the estate was worth protecting. My daughter, who didn't speak for the first month after her mother died, talks to Evelyn the way she used to talk to her mother. My youngest boy, he stopped. He stopped having nightmares," he said. "Since we came to that house, he stopped." He looked up at the judge. "You asked if it's purely transactional," he said. "I don't know what word you'd use for what it is, but I know what it costs me to think about it ending. And that's not a transaction." The room was very still. Delacroix cross-examined. He went after the financial angle, the debt clearance, the permanent land title. Wade confirmed every number flatly and without defensiveness, because the numbers were real, and pretending otherwise would have been foolish. When Delacroix suggested that a man in Wade's financial position had essentially no choice but to accept the arrangement, Wade looked at him directly. "I was offered more money than that contract," he said. "To leave. By your client's associate," I said no. Delacroix had known this was in the record. He'd hoped it wouldn't come up this cleanly. "Your refusal could be interpreted as..." "It could be interpreted a lot of ways," Wade said. "You'll interpret it the way you want. I'm telling you why I actually said no." He kept his eyes on Delacroix without aggression, just steadiness. "I said no because it was Thaddeus offering it, because of what it would have meant for the people for my family." The word landed simply. "Why?" Delacroix sat down. Then Horace called Thomas Garrett. Garrett was 51, had been a ranch foreman in the county for 20 years, and had the build of a man who has spent those years outside in Montana weather, which is its own kind of testimony to Constitution. He sat in the witness chair, like he sat everywhere, uncomfortably, because he was not the kind of man who sat in chairs when there was work to be done. He told his story without embellishment. Thaddeus's associate had approached him 6 weeks ago. The offer was significant. Falsify 3 years of operational records to show declining management under the late Gerald Marlowe's final period of illness, suggesting the estate was already failing, to establish that Evelyn's claim of successfully running the operation was overstated. "Why did you refuse?" Horace asked. "Because it wasn't true," Garrett said. "The operation wasn't failing. Gerald ran it well until he couldn't anymore, and Miss Marlowe ran it well after that. I'm not going to say something different because somebody's paying me to." He paused. "And because what they were asking me to say would have hurt people who didn't deserve it. Did you report the approach at the time?" "I should have," Garrett said. "I didn't right away. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way of a man admitting something about himself. "I was just thinking about it, whether to get involved. That was wrong. I came forward when I had the evidence about the fence." "Why then?" "Because cutting wire to stampede cattle toward a ravine in the dark could have killed someone," Garrett said. "That's a different thing. I wasn't going to let that stand without saying something." Delacroix's cross-examination was brief. There wasn't much to work with. Horace then entered the payment receipt into evidence. He had an expert, a clerk from the Territorial Bank, testify about the account from which the payment had come and the signature authorization required for transactions of that size. Kept it technical and brief, because judges understand financial records better than emotional arguments, and the record was unambiguous. The account was Thaddeus Crowell's. The authorization signature was Thaddeus Crowell's. The memo line, in handwriting that 3 separate witnesses confirmed, matched Thaddeus Crowell's documented hand. Read, North Fence. Thursday night. Thaddeus at his table was very still. His stillness had changed character. It was no longer the stillness of a man who has already decided he's won. It was the stillness of a man who is doing calculations and not liking where they're landing. Delacroix asked for a brief recess. Judge Alcott granted 15 minutes. In the hallway, Evelyn stood with Wade and Horace and Nolan, who had been in the gallery the entire time, and who was now standing with his back against the wall and his arms crossed. Processing. Is it enough? Evelyn said to Horace. The sabotage evidence is damaging to Thaddeus's credibility as a petitioner, Horace said. A judge doesn't look kindly on a man challenging a marriage's legitimacy while paying someone to destroy that family's livelihood. Speaks to motive and to character, he paused. The testimony is strong. I think we're in a good position. What's the trust language say exactly? Wade said. About the conditions. Horace looked at him. The trust requires legal marriage before her 30th birthday, Horace said slowly, as if he was hearing something in the question. It doesn't specify the grounds for marriage, Wade said. Does it say anything about the grounds? Horace opened his case. He had the trust document. He had always had the trust document. He read the relevant section. Then he read it again. Then he looked up at both of them. It requires legal marriage, he said. Properly executed and registered. It doesn't prohibit, it makes no provision for or against the nature of the arrangement. Only the legal fact. So a marriage for practical reasons, Evelyn said slowly. Is still a marriage, Horace said, under the trust. As written. The hallway was quiet. He's been arguing the wrong thing, Wade said. He's been arguing the wrong thing, Horace confirmed. There was something in his voice that was satisfaction barely contained by professionalism. A court might find grounds to invalidate a marriage under general law if both parties committed fraud against the court itself, but the trust challenge was filed under trust terms, and the trust terms don't require that the marriage be for love or even genuine companionship. They require that it be legal. He closed the document. Which it is. Evelyn looked at the document. She thought about Thaddeus in her grandfather's study. His timeline. His certainty. He built an entire strategy on the wrong foundation, she said. He assumed the trust was more specific than it is, Horace said. A man who's spent years trying to find loopholes in a document sometimes assumes the document is as complicated as his efforts to circumvent it. When they went back into the courtroom, Thaddeus's attorney made his closing argument. It was still well constructed. It still had the original contract and the financial terms and the speed of the marriage. But it had also lost the sabotage witness and the payment evidence and 2 cross-examinations that had not gone the way he'd designed them, and the room felt it. Horace's closing was brief. He pointed to the trust language directly. He pointed to the legal execution of the marriage. He pointed to the pattern of interference, the sabotage, the bribe attempt, the falsification scheme, and asked the judge to consider what kind of petitioner mounts a legitimacy to a marriage, while simultaneously paying to destroy that family's property and livelihood. Then he said, the trust requires a legal marriage. Callahan marriage is legal. Everything else before this court is a man's opinion about what kind of marriage it should be, dressed in language to look like a legal question. It isn't a legal question, it's a personal one, and this court has no jurisdiction over it. He sat down. Judge Alcott looked at his papers for a long moment. Then he looked up. The challenge is dismissed, he said. The Marlowe estate remains in the possession of Evelyn Marlowe Callahan, as duly specified by the terms of the Gerald Marlowe Family Trust. As to the evidence of property sabotage and solicitation of false testimony entered into today's record, I'm referring those matters to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office. He looked at Thaddeus directly over his glasses. I'd suggest you have a conversation with your legal team about your next steps, Mr. Crowell. Today's record is going to make certain conversations complicated. He gathered his papers. We're adjourned, he said and stood. The room moved. The gallery made noise. Horace exhaled beside Evelyn in a very controlled way that was also the most genuine thing she'd seen from him all morning. Evelyn sat for a moment. Wade was next to her. He had not moved yet either. He was looking at the judge's empty bench with the expression of a man who is waiting to be sure the thing is real before he believes it. "Done," she said. "It's done," he said. She looked at Thaddeus across the room. He was speaking quietly to Delacroix, his back to her, the conversation that of two men who have lost something significant and are deciding how to characterize it. His composure was intact. She did not expect anything different. Thaddeus Kroll would regroup and recalculate and find another avenue, because that was his nature, and she would be ready for it when he did. But not today. Not with a judge's referral to the prosecutor's office and a dismantled legal challenge and a payment receipt with his handwriting on it sitting in the court record. Today, the pressure had been applied to Thaddeus, and things had moved. Nolan appeared at the bar that divided the gallery from the court floor, because he had come forward from the gallery the moment the judge stood, and he was looking at his father with the expression of a 14-year-old boy who has watched adults do something important and difficult, and has arrived at a specific conclusion about what adults should be. Wade reached over the bar and gripped his son's shoulder. "You did well," he said. The same thing he'd said in the pasture, after the fence. He meant it more now. Nolan looked at Evelyn. She held his gaze. "You were right," he said. "About coming. You earned it," she said. Outside on the courthouse steps in the cold, bright morning after the blizzard, Horace shook Wade's hand, and then Evelyn's, and said he would handle the follow-up documentation and that she should take the family home. He said the word family without particular emphasis, the way you say a word when it has simply become accurate. The drive back was quieter than the drive-in. Not a bad quiet. The kind that comes after something large has been settled, and the body is processing the absence of tension it had been carrying for weeks. At the first creek crossing, the one with the ice at the edges, Nolan got down from the carriage before anyone could say anything, and took the horses by the bridle and walked them across. His boots in the ice water, the same as Wade had done that morning. Climbed back in, his boots were wet. He didn't say anything about it. Wade looked at his son and did not say anything either, because some things don't need words, and adding words to them takes something away. Evelyn watched the road, the bright snow on either side of it, the tracks they'd made coming out, still visible beneath the new light. 12 miles back to the estate, Maisie and Toby at the house waiting Mrs. Holt with whatever she'd prepared, Percy who already knew the outcome, because Percy always knew things before anyone told him. She thought about what came next. The original contract still sat in her desk. Amended or annulled, Horace had said. The legal machinery of it. The year that had already had 3 months taken from it. The agreement that still had its terms. Technically, regardless of what the judge had said, because the judge had spoken to the trust, not to the contract between two people at a kitchen table. She thought about the saddlebags that were no longer by the barn door. She thought about a lot of things on that drive, and she let herself think them, because the courthouse was behind her, and her land was ahead, and beside her was a man who had told a judge, plainly and without performing it, that he knew what it cost him to think about it ending. That was not nothing. That was in fact quite a lot. The estate gate came into view at the end of the drive, and through it the house, and on the porch, because it was Toby, a small figure in a coat that was slightly too large bouncing, with enough energy to be visible from the road, and beside him a smaller than small silhouette that was Maisie, holding Toby's arm to keep him from bouncing off the porch entirely. "He's been out there for an hour," Nolan said. "Minimum." "He knew we'd come back," Evelyn said. "He always," as Nolan said. "He's annoying about it." But he was looking at his brother through the carriage window with an expression that had nothing annoying in it at all. They came through the gate, and Toby came off the porch at a run, and the carriage had barely stopped before he was at the door. Flushed and loud and demanding simultaneously to know what happened, and also to tell them that Gerald the Bucket had been moved to a different location by Mrs. Holt, and this was an injustice that required addressing. Wade caught him as he climbed in and held him for a moment. Just a moment, the way he'd held Nolan in the pasture, brief and complete. "We won," Wade said. "I knew it," Toby said. "I told Gerald." "I'm sure that helped." Evelyn said. It absolutely did, Toby said with total sincerity. Maisie was standing at the carriage door. She had not run because Maisie did not run toward things. She waited for them to come to her, which was its own kind of certainty. She looked at her father. She looked at Evelyn. Did everything go the way it was supposed to? She said. Better, Evelyn said. Maisie nodded, like she'd expected better and had simply been waiting for confirmation. She held out her hand to help Evelyn down from the carriage, which she had never done before, and Evelyn took it, which she also had never done. And they walked into the house together, with Toby running ahead of them, talking about the bucket and the blizzard, and list questions about the courthouse that he had apparently been composing all morning. And behind them, Wade and Nolan came through the door, talking about the horses and the creek crossing and the ice, and Mrs. Holt appeared from the kitchen with the expression of a woman who has made soup for a reason and intends for it to be eaten. The house was loud. It was warm. It smelled like wood smoke and food and the particular aliveness of a place where people are genuinely present in it. Evelyn stood in the entry hall for a moment and let it settle around her. Outside, Thaddeus Crowell was in a carriage going somewhere to begin calculating what came next. The prosecutor's office had the payment receipt. The county had the testimony. The ranch families in the valley still had their grazing access and their river crossing, and the knowledge that the Marlowe estate was not going to be sold in parcels to the highest bidder. And inside this house, in this entry hall, with soup in the kitchen and a 9-year-old informing Percy that everything had gone better than expected, and a 6-year-old attempting to explain the bucket situation to anyone who would listen, the original contract still sat in her desk. She had one item of unfinished business. She could see, from where she stood, that Wade had stopped in the hallway and was watching his children with the specific expression he wore when he thought no one was looking at him. The one that had all of it in it, the loss that was never fully close, and the life that kept going anyway, and the 3 people who were the reason it had. He felt her looking. He turned. She held his gaze. There were things she needed to say. Not today. Not in this hallway with Toby explaining buckets and the smell of soup and the aftermath of a hearing still settling in her bones. Soon. The contract had a clock on it, and she was done, pretending the clock was the only thing governing the situation. He seemed to understand something of this, because he held her gaze without looking away, which was how they both communicated the things that were too large for the available moment. Then Toby appeared in the hallway and said, "Are you two just going to stand there?" And the moment broke into the ordinary beautiful noise of the house. And Evelyn went to the kitchen, and Wade followed, and the fire was going, and the soup was hot. And outside the Marlowe estate, the snow was bright and unbroken, and the fences held. 3 weeks after the hearing, the prosecutor's office filed formal charges against Thaddeus Crowell. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no confrontation in the street, no scene at the estate gate. Evelyn learned about it from Horace, who sent a note that arrived on a Tuesday morning while she was in the north pasture with Wade, arguing about whether to bring the remaining cattle in before the next cold front, or let them run another week on the winter grass. The note was brief and factual, which was how Horace communicated things he considered settled. She read it and handed it to Wade. He read it and handed it back. Sabotage and solicitation of false testimony, she said. He'll have lawyers in from the city within the week. Will they help him? Wade said. They'll slow things down, she said. They won't make the payment receipt disappear, or Garrett's testimony, or the account records. She folded the note. His business agreements with the estate were already terminated. The ranching families he'd pressured have started talking to each other about what he did. Harlan Creighton apparently had a conversation with 2 other Valley ranchers last week about collective agreements that would make Thaddeus's kind of leverage impossible going forward. Wade looked at the herd on the winter grass. Harlan moves fast when he decides something matters. Ruth Creighton told Maisie the same thing, Evelyn said. Apparently they had a long conversation about it while the rest of us were at the hearing. Wade looked at her. Ruth Creighton talked strategy with my 9-year-old daughter. Maisie has views, Evelyn said. Ruth recognized them. Something in Wade's face that was close to wonder and also close to something more vulnerable. His children kept revealing themselves to him in new ways, Which was the thing about children that nobody warns you about adequately, that they don't stop becoming, that you can think you know who they are, and then find out there's more. And the more is always a surprise and always, somehow, inevitable. The cattle, he said, returning to the practical, because it was what they did. 2 more weeks. The grass is still good on the east section. 1 more week, she said. The front is going to be worse than last time. He looked at the sky in the particular way he looked at weather, reading it like a page. 1 week, he agreed. They walked back to the house with the specific, unhurried quality of 2 people who have stopped needing to explain why they're walking in the same direction. The contract was still in her desk. She had not taken it out since the hearing. It sat in the center drawer, underneath the property maps and the seasonal supply orders, and she was aware of it the way you are aware of a conversation you know you need to have. Not anxious about it, exactly. More like a person who knows a door needs to be opened and is choosing the right moment. The right moment turned out to be a Sunday in December, on a morning when the snow was coming down in the large quiet flakes that mean no wind and no urgency, just winter doing its ordinary work. The children were occupied Nolan in the stable with the mare, who had come all the way around and now followed him like a slow 4-legged shadow. Maisie with a veterinary text she had located in the estate library and claimed as hers without asking. Toby somewhere in the house involved in a project that periodically required loud sound effects. Wade was in the library. She found him there with the cattle records, the new ones he'd started keeping in his own hands since the fall, organized in a way that was different from how she'd organized them, but better, more useful. Built around the way the land actually worked, rather than the way a previous manager had assumed it worked. Took the contract from the desk drawer. She set it on the table in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. The year isn't over, he said. No, she said. We have 9 months left. So this isn't. I'm not ending it, she said. I need to know what you want. Not what the contract says, what you want. He was quiet. That's not a simple question, he said. I know, she said. Take the time you need. I don't need time, he said. He stopped. He looked at the contract, the papers with the financial terms and the signatures and the 1-year clause. I need to say something I'm not sure how to say. She sat down across from him. Then say it badly, she said. I'll follow. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said it, which was the thing about Wade that she had come to understand, was both his greatest difficulty and his clearest quality, that when he finally spoke, he meant it. All of it, without the soft edges people put on things to make them easier to hear. I didn't come to this house to fall in love with it, he said. Or with you. I came because my children needed what you were offering, and I thought I could be useful enough to earn it honestly. That was what I told myself. He looked at the contract. But somewhere around the 2nd week, when you handed Maisie a bucket without making her feel like a guest in someone else's house, I started lying to myself. And somewhere around the blizzard, I stopped being able to. The snow fell outside the window. The fire made its sounds. Contract ends in 9 months, he said, and I know that's what we agreed. I know you can hold me to it, and I'd walk out of here with the land and the debts cleared, and my kids provided for, which is what we said. But I'm telling you that's not what I want. What I want is, he paused. Not because he didn't know, because he wanted to say it right. I want to stay. Not because the roof is good, or the land is yours, or the children are settled. Because of you. Because you told a courtroom that my children were yours, and you meant it, and I knew you meant it. Because you got on your horse in a blizzard and rode a trail you hadn't used in 15 years because the cattle needed saving. Because you argue with me about everything, and you're right about half of it, and honest about which half, which is more than I've had from anyone in a long time. He was looking at her directly. That's what I want, he said. I wanted you to know that. Whatever you decide. Evelyn had managed the largest cattle estate in northern Montana. She had faced down a drawing room full of men who wanted her land. She had ridden a half-overgrown service trail in a blizzard and stood in a courthouse and told a judge that 3 children who were not hers by any document were hers by everything that mattered. She was not a woman who was undone by things. She was slightly undone by this. Not in a way that showed much, but enough. I sat in this house for 3 years eating dinner alone, she said. In the dining room. The formal one. where my grandfather used to host 30 people. I ate alone in there every night because it seemed wrong to retreat to the kitchen, like I was admitting the house was too large for me. She looked at the table. The first week you were here, I started eating in the kitchen. I told myself it was practical, easier with the children, better for the mornings. She looked up. It wasn't practical. I just didn't want to be alone in that room anymore. He held her gaze. The contract, she said. I'm not holding you to it, he said immediately. I know that, she said. I want to talk about what replaces it. Pause. What do you want it to say, he said. Nothing, she said. I don't want another contract. I've had enough contracts. She picked up the papers. I want this one to be the last one. She set it on top of the fire. Caught quickly, the way paper does, and they watched it for a moment, the terms and the signatures and the financial clauses, all of it going to ash in the Marlowe Library fireplace. And the thing it had been was gone, and the thing it had started was not. 9 months early, Wade said. Some things don't need to wait for their scheduled end, she said. He almost smiled. Not almost. He smiled, fully, which she had seen before, but not often, and it was, she thought, a very good thing to have seen. I have conditions, he said. Of course you do, she said. I'm not a gentleman of leisure, he said. I run the cattle operation or I don't stay. Equally. Not as your employee and not as your decoration. As your partner. Agreed, she said. And the children are not a condition, she said. They stopped being a condition a long time ago. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Maisie's going to have thoughts about this, he said. Maisie has thoughts about everything, Evelyn said. I've learned to find that reassuring. Nolan brought me coffee in the stable last Thursday, she said, without being asked, while I was working with the mayor. He didn't say anything. He just set it on the post and left. She looked at Wade. I think Nolan has been all right for a while. He just needed to decide it for himself. Wade looked at his hands on the table. Those hands she had come to know in the way you know things you see every day. The work that lived in them. The care. And Toby, he said, and his voice changed slightly on the name the way it always did. The specific frequency of a man who has a youngest child and knows what that means. Toby told me last week that Gerald and Frank are very happy in their new location, she said, and that our family is the best family in Montana. He included me in the census without discussion. Wade looked up. He includes everyone he likes, he said. He included Percy last month. Percy is very moved, Evelyn said. He doesn't show it, but he is. Wade made the sound that was his version of laughing. She had learned to count it. All right, he said. No more contracts. No more contracts, she agreed. Outside, the snow fell in its large, quiet flakes, and the estate was still, and the cattle were in the pasture, and the fences held, and somewhere in the house Toby was making sounds that suggested his project had reached a critical phase. They told the children that evening after supper, in the kitchen where everything important had happened in this house since October. Maisie's response was to look at both of them very steadily for a long moment, and then say, I knew this was going to happen, in the tone of a person who had in fact known and was being judicious about not having said so. You knew, Wade said. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make it strange, Maisie said. Sometimes people need to figure things out without being told they're figuring them out. Evelyn looked at this 9-year-old person and thought, not for the first time, that Maisie Callahan was going to be a considerable force in whatever she chose to do with her life. Nolan said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Does this mean we're staying? And when Evelyn said yes, permanently, he nodded and looked at the table, and the muscle in his jaw moved slightly, which was as close as Nolan Callahan came to showing the full weight of his relief. Toby said, I already told Percy, which made Wade close his eyes briefly, and also I told Gerald, which was apparently a thing that now happened in this household, and which nobody had the heart to discourage. The second wedding happened in January. On a clear, cold morning, when the light on the snow was the particular brilliant white that only appears about 4 days a year in northern Montana and makes everything look like a country that exists only in good weather. There was no courthouse this time. Horace Finch came to the estate, which he had never done in a professional capacity before, and he brought the paperwork and a bottle of something that he said Gerald would have wanted opened for this occasion, which was the most sentiment Evelyn had ever seen from him, and which she appreciated without saying so. The ceremony was in the library, which had become, over the past 3 months, the room that was most genuinely theirs, the maps on the table and the ledgers on the shelves, and the fire that was always going, and the 2 chairs that had stopped being her chair and his chair and become simply the chairs. Nolan stood beside his father. He had asked the day before if he could. He had asked Evelyn, not Wade, which was a choice she understood and did not make a production of. She had said yes. He had nodded and gone back to the stable, and that had been the whole conversation, but it was one of the most complete conversations she had ever had. Maisie had picked wildflowers, which in January in Montana meant dried ones from the arrangement on the hall table, which she had disassembled and reconstructed into something that was, honestly, better than the original. She presented them to Evelyn the morning of the ceremony with a gravity that was 9 years old and 50 at the same time. "They're not fresh," she said, "but they lasted. That's the right kind," Evelyn said. Toby wore his good coat and managed to stay still for approximately 4 minutes before informing the assembled group that he was the one who had known all along this was going to happen, which was disputed by Maisie and uncontested by everyone else, because arguing with Toby about things he had decided he knew was a use of time nobody had identified as worthwhile. Horace read the words, brief and plain. Wade said what he said, and Evelyn said what she said, and neither of them looked away. She had been married once before in a courthouse on a Thursday, with a justice of the peace and a witness, and no flowers and no children watching. She had gone through it with her jaw set and her hand steady, and the particular composure of a person doing what needs to be done. This was different. This was different in every way a thing can be different from what it superficially resembles, which is to say it was the same words and the same legal result, and an entirely different country. When it was done, Toby announced to the room that they were now a family, officially, as if the room required the update, and Percy, who had been invited to stand in the hall because Evelyn had asked him and because he deserved it, made a sound from the doorway that was not crying, but was close enough that everyone had the grace to find other things to look at for a moment. The months that followed were not easy, in the way that real things are not easy. They were complicated and sometimes frustrating, and occasionally they disagreed badly enough that voices were raised, which happened twice about cattle management, and once about a decision involving the estate accounts, where they were both partly right, and neither was willing to say so first. And they arrived at the answer, eventually through the grinding process of 2 stubborn people who respect each other enough to keep talking past the point where talking is comfortable. Thaddeus's legal case moved through the territory's slow machinery. His lawyers were as capable as Evelyn had predicted, and as limited by the evidence as she had also predicted. Payment receipt held. Garrett's testimony held. 3 other Valley ranchers came forward with accounts of pressure Thaddeus had applied over the years that they had not previously felt safe reporting. The charges expanded. By spring, his land holdings in the county had become a liability rather than an asset, and the conversations about what he would be allowed to keep were not going in his favor. He did not come to the Marlowe estate again. He sent no more men with propositions. He was simply, gradually, the way a pressure system dissipates, no longer a feature of the weather. Evelyn restructured the trust in the spring, working with Horace for 2 months on language that would ensure no future heir of the Marlowe estate could be compelled by trust conditions into marriage or any legal arrangement as a condition of inheritance. She did it quietly, without announcement, because it was not something that needed an audience. It was something that needed to be done. She also established permanent grazing agreements with 7 Valley ranching families, agreements that were structured to be genuinely reciprocal rather than arrangements that could be renegotiated when one party's circumstances changed. Harlan Creighton helped draft the framework, which he did with more thoroughness than Evelyn had expected, and which Ruth told her later was because Harlan had decided that the Callahan marriage was the kind of thing that changed how a county worked, and he intended to be on the right side of the change. Evelyn did not know what to do with being called the Callahan marriage by Harlan Creighton, who had once looked at Wade across a dinner table as a man of insufficient standing. She decided not to do anything with it. Some evolutions are better acknowledged by continuing than by comment. Wade took over the cattle operation fully in the spring, which had always been the direction but was formalized when Evelyn sat him down in the library one April morning and placed the operational ledger in front of him and said, "This is yours as much as mine." She meant it in the way of a person who has had to learn that sharing is not the same as losing, which is a lesson that comes harder to people who have been alone with their responsibilities for a long time. Took the ledger. He did not make a ceremony of it because he was not a ceremonious man. He simply opened it to the current page and asked about the breeding schedule for the next quarter, and they were, within 30 seconds, in the middle of a conversation about cattle that was also a conversation about everything else, which was how it had been since October, and which she had come to understand was the specific shape their life had. Nolan, in the summer of his 15th year, did something with the nervous mare that the hands talked about for the rest of the season. He had spent 8 months with her, the slow incremental work of rebuilding trust in an animal that had been failed by the people responsible for it. By June, she was reliable under saddle. By July, she was responsive in ways that suggested she had not forgotten good training, only suspended it while she waited to see whether it was safe to bring it back. In August, Nolan rode her in the county's informal summer gathering, the kind of low-stakes social event that served as the valley's way of checking on itself. She performed better than horses that had cost 3 times what the Marlowe estate had paid for her, and afterward 3 ranchers asked about her breeding and whether there were more where she came from. Evelyn told them to speak with Nolan directly. He was the one who knew the horse. He was not expecting that. He handled it the way he handled most things, with more capability than he yet knew he had, and with the specific seriousness of a person who is learning that his knowledge has value and is not entirely sure yet what to do with that information. That evening, at supper, he was quieter than usual, which with Nolan meant thinking rather than troubled. 3 people asked about her, he said. "I know," Evelyn said. "I referred them to you. I didn't know what to tell them." "You told them the truth about the horse," Wade said. "That's what they needed." "What do you want to do with it?" Evelyn said. "The breeding program. If there were more like her." Nolan looked at his plate, then at his father, then at Evelyn. "I'd want to do it right," he said. "Not just for profit. For the horses. That's the only way worth doing it," Evelyn said. He nodded. He went back to eating. But something had settled in him that had been slightly unsettled before, another piece of himself falling into a place he'd been looking for it. Maisie had, by that point, read every veterinary text in the estate library and 2 borrowed from the county seat's small lending collection, and she had developed opinions about animal medicine that she delivered with the calm authority of someone who has not yet learned that certainty in expertise is supposed to be earned slowly. She had assisted with 2 difficult calvings in the spring, standing beside the ranch hand who handled veterinary work with the focused attention of a student who is not there to watch but to learn. And by the second one, he had been taking direction from her, more than giving it, which he seemed to find more natural than strange. At 9 going on 10, Wade Callahan had decided what she was going to do with her life. She had not announced it formally. She had simply begun doing it, which was more or less how Maisie did everything. And Toby grew, the way youngest children grow, when they have stopped being afraid, without drama and without the particular thinness that fear puts in children. He grew round-faced and loud and deeply interested in everything, and he accumulated knowledge about the estate with the thoroughness of a small person who has decided that this is his kingdom and intends to understand every part of it. He knew every hand's name and most of their histories. He knew which horse preferred which stall. He knew that Percy's coffee was better than Mrs. Holt's, and had communicated this opinion to both parties, which had created a situation that the household managed diplomatically. He barely remembered the cabin. He did not remember what it felt like to go to sleep, not knowing if they would still be in the same place in the morning. Evelyn thought about that sometimes, about the specific gift of a child who gets to forget the hard parts because the good parts came and stayed. It was not something she had planned to give anyone. It was not something she had known she wanted to give until she was already giving it and understood what it was. In the autumn of the following year, Wade found the original contract. It was in her desk, in the center drawer, which was where she kept things that mattered more than they were supposed to. He had been looking for a property survey, and he found it instead, the original copy, the one she had placed on his kitchen table in October, with hands that were steadier than she felt. He unfolded it. He read it. The financial terms, and the timeline, and the signatures, his own handwriting from a year ago that looked like the handwriting of someone who was choosing carefully, because the consequences of a wrong choice were too large to recover from. He found her in the north pasture, checking the fence on the new section they'd extended in August. She was kneeling at a post with a fence tool, and she looked up when he came, and he held up the paper. She looked at it. "I thought I burned that," she said. "The other copy," he said. "You burned the one you brought to the table. This one was already in the desk when you brought the other one out." She sat back on her heels. "Horace's copy." "Yours," he said. "From before." She looked at it. He could see her deciding whether to be embarrassed that she'd kept it or honest about why. She chose honest, because she almost always chose honest when she remembered she had the option. "I kept it," she said. "I don't entirely know why. Maybe because it was where it started. Maybe because..." She stopped. She looked at the fence post she'd been working on. "When I drove to your cabin that morning, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I still don't know, actually. I know it worked. That's different from knowing it was right." He crouched down beside her, the paper in his hand. "It was right," he said. "You can't know that," she said. "Could have gone badly, if you'd been a different kind of man. If the children had, but it didn't," he said. "That doesn't make the original decision right," she said. "It makes it lucky." He thought about this. He was a man who took thoughts seriously rather than performing them. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe right decisions and lucky outcomes look the same from the outside. Maybe the part that was right was that you were looking for integrity rather than advantage. And you found it, because you knew what to look for." She looked at him. "That's generous," she said. "It's accurate," he said. She took the contract from his hand. She looked at it for a moment, the document that had started the signatures, and the terms, and the 30-day deadline, and the 1 year that had become something else entirely. She turned it over. She took the pencil from her coat pocket, the one she always had there for marking fence posts and supply notes, and the margins of ledgers, and she wrote on the back of the contract in her own handwriting, in the clear, deliberate hand she used for things that needed to be unambiguous. She handed it back to him. He read what she'd written. "The worst bargain I ever made and the best decision of my life." He looked at it for a long time. "Keep it," she said. "Or burn it. Either way." He folded it. He put it in his coat pocket. They finished the fence together, the two of them kneeling in the autumn grass with the tools between them. The mountains to the west going gold in the afternoon light, and the cattle moving in the new section and the sound of the estate going about its business all around them. It was not romantic in the way stories make things romantic. It was muddy, and the fence post had a crack that was going to need resin before winter, and her knees were cold from the ground. He had a blister on his right palm from the morning's work that he had not mentioned. The wind was picking up. But this, she thought, was the thing that nobody tells you about a life that has actually been built, rather than merely inherited. It doesn't look the way you imagined it would. It looks like two people in a pasture fixing a fence, with a family somewhere behind them, in a house that used to be too large and isn't anymore, and work that is genuinely shared, and the specific kind of tiredness that comes from days that have been fully used. There was a version of her life in which she had married one of Thaddeus's suitors, in which she had kept the estate and lost herself inside it, in which the house remained large and correct and silent, and she had remained the competent, solitary woman at the head of a table set for 30 with only one person eating. She had almost let that version happen. She had almost let the deadline and the pressure and the carefully arranged acceptable options make the decision for her. That was the nearest she had come to a real failure, not the legal challenge, or the blizzard, or the sabotaged fence. The nearest she had come to losing everything that mattered was the moment before she rode to a small cabin in October with a contract and a reckless idea, when she had almost decided that the reckless idea was too much and the acceptable option was enough. It wasn't. It almost never is. What she had learned not easily, and not without cost, and not in the clean way that lessons come in stories, but in the grinding, Inconvenient, occasionally infuriating way they come in actual lives was that security and safety are not the same thing, and that a life built to be defended is not the same as a life worth defending. She had spent 3 years protecting the Marlowe estate with the fierce competence of a woman who understood that the world was looking for a reason to take it from her. She had not spent those years building anything for herself because she had confused the estate with herself and had not understood the difference until a 6-year-old boy asked her whether she intended to send them away. Wade had said once that people who have enough to lose become very careful. She had known what he meant because she had been that person, and careful had almost been the worst thing she ever was. The children were not a thing she had planned. You cannot plan for the specific way a person becomes necessary to you. The way it happens, not in a single moment, but in accumulation. A bucket named Gerald, a cold walk across a south pasture, a 9-year-old handing you dried flowers and saying they lasted. You cannot plan for a 14-year-old who brings you coffee in a stable without comment and means by it something he will not say directly for another year. You cannot plan for Toby. You could not plan for any of it. She had come to understand, not the problem. That was the point. The fence was done. The light was going. Somewhere back at the house, Toby was almost certainly doing something that required adult intervention, or at minimum awareness. And Maisie was almost certainly reading, and Nolan was almost certainly in the stable with the mare. Wade stood and helped her up, which she took without the reflex to say she didn't need it, because she had also learned that accepting help was not the same as needing to be rescued, and that the people who love you are not diminished by being allowed to be useful. They walked back across the north pasture toward the house as the sky went orange and the first stars came up and the cold settled in properly, the good, clean Montana cold that doesn't apologize for itself. Percy made a bet, Wade said. On what? On whether the mare would foal before Christmas or after. Who did he bet with? Toby, Wade said. Evelyn considered this. Toby doesn't have any money. No. But he offered Percy 3 weeks of not asking him questions at breakfast, which Percy apparently valued more than currency. She thought about the economics of this arrangement. Can Toby actually stop asking questions at breakfast? Percy seems to think he has a reasonable chance of winning either way, Wade said. She laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes without preparation, and the sound of it went across the pasture in the cold air. And Wade was looking at her with the expression he didn't know he wore when he thought she wasn't paying attention, the one that had everything in it. She had found that expression in October, and she had been finding it ever since, and she was still not entirely used to it, which she suspected was not a problem. Some things are better when they stay new. The house came into view with its lights on, warm squares in the gathering dark, and through the kitchen window, the shape of Maisie doing something at the table. And then Toby appearing at the window and seeing them, and immediately gesturing at something behind him with the urgency of a person for whom all news is urgent. Something's happened, Wade said. Something's always happening, Evelyn said. Should we be concerned? With Toby, probably not, she said. Almost certainly not, but we should go see. They came through the gate and across the yard, and the kitchen door opened before they reached it because Toby had apparently been waiting at it, and he announced with the full force of his considerable personality that the mare had done something in the stable, and Nolan needed them, and also that he, Toby, had known it was going to happen today. He had told Percy this morning, and did that mean he won the bet? We have to go to the stable, Evelyn said to Wade. We have to go to the stable, he agreed. They went, all of them, Toby ahead at a run, Maisie coming from the kitchen with her veterinary text, because she was not going to miss this. Wade and Evelyn behind them across the dark yard toward the barn, where the light was already on, and Nolan was already there, because Nolan was always already there when the horses needed something. This is what it looked like. 4 people crossing a yard in the dark towards something that needed them. A house with the lights on behind them, a stable with the lights on ahead. The specific small chaos of a family in motion. This is what Evelyn Marlowe, who had inherited thousands of acres and a profitable cattle operation and a trust condition in 30 days, had not known she was bargaining for when she placed a contract on a kitchen table in October and said, I need a husband for 1 year. She had bargained for a year. She had inherited a life. And outside, Their children raced across the yard, and the fences held, and the land was theirs, and it was cold, and the stars were very bright, and there was nowhere else either of them would have been.